Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the February 25th regular meeting of Council. I'd first like to recognize we are in the traditional territory, the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk tonight will be Ms. Sheila Gurry. The question period sign-up sheets are available on the partition walls near the gallery in 2 spots. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, would you please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet, and at the start of question period I will call those who've signed up to the podium to address Council. And the first item on the agenda tonight is the introduction of late items. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. This evening for late items, we have for agenda item 10F, we're going to add Ms. Lisa Bhopal Singh, Manager of Community and Cultural Planning, to be doing a presentation prior to Council adopting or looking into item 10F. As well, for item 10F, we're adding a delegation from Mr. Kim Smythe, CEO, Nanaimo Chamber of Commerce. For agenda item 10F, another delegation from Mr. David Murchie. And for item 10E, we're adding a presentation from Bill Corson, Deputy Director of Community Development. And one item of note, just late, under the purpose for the report 10A 2018 to 2022 Financial Plan Amendment Bylaw, there is a typo in that, and it should read 2018 September 17th as the last time the bylaw was amended and not 2019. So thank you, Your Worship.
So a motion for approval of the agenda as amended. Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? All those in favour? Motion carried. Thank you. A motion for the adoption of minutes is circulated. Councillor Brown, Councillor Thorpe seconding. All those in favour? Motion carried. Thank you. Mayor's report. Number of interesting events in the city in the last week or so, including the Heritage Summit, which was probably one of the best attended Heritage Summits in our community's history, with the numbers out, which was very positive, and noted the presence of 5 members of council at that meeting as well, which is positive. The Fish and Game Banquet, another successful event, recognizing a very important organization in our community. I think it's fair to say that hopefully the snow has passed, because it's probably the appropriate time, I trust, without calling down a curse, to thank the city staff who made yeoman efforts to deal with an incredible snowfall that impacted so many in the community. So that is it for the Mayor's report. Do we have any presentations, Ms. Gurry? None, I believe. Delegations? None relate in the general sense, only those related to item 10F, correct? And a motion for the adoption of the consent items. Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to pull out consent item 9C21, the Finance and Audit Committee key date calendar, please.
9B? 9C.
9C21.
21.
So, Your Worship, Council will vote on the remainder of the consent items and then deal with that pulled item afterwards.
So a motion for the adoption of the consent items with the exception noted. Councillor Bonner, seconded Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favour? Motion carried. Anything further on that, Councillor Hemmens?
May I, Ms. Gurry, is this where I speak to why I would like it pulled out? Okay, great, thank you. So I would like for you to just share the rationale for the move, including the financial implications and any IT updates to the SARC building. Thank you.
So thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Hemmens and the remainder of Council. I discussed it a little bit this afternoon at our special committee of the whole meeting that we held in the Service and Resource Centre boardroom. And some of the rationale behind the move of the committee meetings is to have all of the committee meetings of Council at the Service and Resource Centre boardroom. The cost savings was calculated by using the costs of the special committee of the wholes we have been having there every other Monday afternoon, compared with finance and audit committee meetings that we have had here in this boardroom, this council chambers, and the difference is $1,300. But not only that, to have the committee meetings all back together at the SARC boardroom, where it's less formal setting, I think is the way council wishes to conduct its committee meetings, though it is their direction. As well, for the sound and quality of the video at the Service and Resource Center, it has been an ongoing issue for some years. Staff have been paying close attention lately to the quality of the video as well as the sound, and it has improved immensely using slight tweaks. And further improvements that will be made are headsets for presenters, so staff or outside people that come in and do presentations will now have a microphone headset, because they have been by far the hardest to hear when watching the video and recording. As well, there was some feedback that we received about the presentations on the screen, not unlike we have here, and for viewers at home not being able to see that screen. And IT has come up with a solution. It's a simple button that staff can press, and now I think we put it in place today, and so viewers at home can now see the presentation on the screen. And the hearing and sound has been really much better as of late, and we're going to continue to look for improvements. But as for additional microphones that we were looking at installing, the problems in the sound could be worse, as well as the cumbersome process of the having the timers and the speaking and the buttons and the process, which kind of takes away from the less formal setting that I think council would like to have at its committee meetings. So that's the rationale for the move from here back to the Service and Resource Center. The Finance and Audit Committee meetings were originally up there and they were moved down here. And I think the main reason of it was for video and sound quality, which, like I said, has improved.
Thank you very much. Ready to move the item?
Oh, yes.
Councillor Bonner? Seconder, Councillor? Second, Councillor Brown. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you. You're opposed? Duly noted. Next item is reports. The 2018-2022 Financial Plan Amendment Bylaw. Ms. Mercer, good evening.
Thank you, Your Worship. During the year, items come up that are in addition to the items that were adopted in the final budget that happens before May 15th each year. And these changes we include in an amendment and make the changes to the bylaw and present it before council for approval. So this report reflects the changes that were made between September 18th and December 31st, 2018, because our last adoption amendment was adopted in September. And this outlines additions as well as any changes between projects that some come in under budget and some over, and we do some allocating between the projects to make everything work. So it is before you tonight to approve these changes.
Thank you very much. Ms. Gurry, we have to deal with each of these motions separately.
That is correct, Your Worship. So normally the acting mayor will read out the bylaw readings.
Councillor Bonner.
Let me see if I'm on the right page here. Motion that the Financial Plan Amendment Bylaw 2019 number 7253.04 to amend the 2018-2022 Financial Plan pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. Any discussion? Councillor Thorpe?
No, on second reading.
Sorry. All right. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Councillor Bonner?
Motion that Financial Plan Amendment Bylaw 2019 number 7253.04 pass second reading.
Seconded. Councillor Brown? Any discussion? Councillor Thorpe?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I just want to make sure that I'm reading this report correctly because it seemed to me it was a good news amendment report in that we're really, due to grants or private donations, adding money to the pots that we have of money for financing these various projects. So on the whole, it's a case of adding to our resources.
Through your worship, to Councillor Thorpe. Yes, the majority of the additions were due to private contributions that were received that we hadn't anticipated. There was a land purchase and an amendment to year 2 of the budget, but the majority is from new private contributions.
That's good. Thank you, Ms. Mercer.
Very good. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Motion that the financial plan amendment bylaw 2019, number 7253.04, pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you very much. The next is Parks, Recreation and Culture Regulation Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7073, period 07, and Bylaw Enforcement Notice Amendment Bylaw 2018, number 7159.04. Mr. LaBerge.
Good evening, Your Worship. The report this evening is to present for consideration amendments to the Parks, Recreation and Culture Regulation Bylaw 2019, number 7073, and the accompanying provisions of the Bylaw Enforcement Bylaw 2012. These amendments are substantially related to the use of public park space by the homeless for overnight shelter. There's a necessity to bring our bylaws into compliance with the legal framework set out in several recent BC Supreme Court decisions. The amendments that are proposed in the bylaw will remove the prohibition from occupying or remaining in a park for the purpose of temporary overnight abode as currently exists in section 3.4. With it, we'll be replacing section 5.4, which prohibits taking up the permanent temporary overnight abode in a park unless it's permitted in the new section 7. The provisions of that section read that homeless person may erect and occupy temporary shelter where there's no shelter accommodation available in the city at that time. The only time that will be permitted for the shelter activity in the park is between the hours of 7 p.m. and 9 a.m. the following morning. And the final requirement is that the shelter must be entirely dismantled and removed by 9 a.m. the following morning. The temporary shelter cannot be erected or occupied within the parameters of the accompanying Schedule D of the bylaw. And that sets out that they cannot take shelter within 20 meters of park amenities which are listed in the schedule or in any park that is listed in Schedule D. Just for a bit of clarification, the parks that do appear in Schedule D were selected in accordance with provisions set out in the Supreme Court case laws. And what it seeks to do is distinguish between developed and non-developed areas of our park spaces. Secondly, it considers the proximity to services that are available in the community for the homeless. There's an option of considering whether areas may be environmentally sensitive. The areas should enable individuals to sleep, rest, shelter, and stay warm. So the parks that appear in Schedule D that are prohibited are generally waterfront open spaces that have heavy usage, tourism, public use, and sites where special events occur. The intention was to reduce conflicts between potential campers and other people that use the park areas. It's been asked what other parks such as Beban, Bowen, or Colliery Dam, why they were included. And the discussion went to the fact that these are broader parks that can balance overnight shelter and a reasonable privacy away from the general movement of pedestrians, traffic, and program usage that typically occur in those parks. It's also important to note that those parks also provide access to facilities, including washrooms and shelter, that are important to homeless individuals. The other park that appears in the schedule of prohibited parks is City Hall, or the City Hall grounds. This was included as these grounds afford no privacy to take shelter, and the primary purpose of the City Hall, of course, is as a workplace and a site of local government. while City Hall may be a tempting site for a protest encampment, which has occurred in the past, this is not a purpose that is recognized or sanctioned in the case laws, and therefore it was included in the schedule.
Thank you, Mr. LeBerge. Councillor Bonner?
Recreation and Culture Regulation Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7073.07, to allow for overnight shelter in city parks and other regulatory matters, pass first reading.
Seconded. Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? Discussion will come with second reading. Any discussion? Thank you very much. I thought you'd get the point. All those in favor? Motion carried. Councillor Bonner?
Motion that Parks, Recreation, and Culture Regulation Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7073.07, pass second reading.
Seconded. Discussion. Councillor Arms, I believe Councillor Hemmons. You're on.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. LeBerge. I'm a little concerned about this one sentence, and you referenced it just in your verbal report, that factors that we're going to be considering in this are ensuring that individuals can sleep, rest, shelter, stay warm, eat, wash, and attend to personal hygiene. And I'm wondering if that makes the city somehow responsible for providing those services if we are allowing them to stay in those parks.
Through the Chair, no, this does not put any onus or obligation on the city to provide these services. Just the case law provides that we have to provide areas that have reasonable expectation that homeless individuals can carry out these functions.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. LeBerge. I'm concerned about the definition of homeless person, where you have in there that they can't have access to a shelter. So if the RCMP or bylaws were to take action on that, who's responsible to check all the public shelter facilities? Because I'm assuming that has to be done before any enforcement can be taken. That'll be my first question, then a follow-up after, Your Worship.
Through the Chair to Councillor Armstrong. Not quite.
Hold it.
The definition of homeless was one that was crafted by lawyers, and they feel that the wording provides a reverse onus on the individual to establish that they meet the definition of homeless and that they had no access to shelter space at the time. So it's not up to the police or bylaws to prove or demonstrate, but the individual that's taken shelter.
Follow up, if I may, Your Worship, through you. And so there's no concerns then about, like, if I myself wanted to go set up overnight, I'm allowed to, based on this bylaw, since I'm not homeless?
The exemptions in Section 7 of the bylaw allow or permit people that are homeless to take shelter. It doesn't give a general provisional and to allow other individuals to do so.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. LeBerge.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Mr. LeBerge. The concern I have is with regard to the timing of when that's going to be available, from 7 p.m. to 9 a.m. And my concern is not so much in April, when it's probably going to be not used in the park. People won't be necessarily in the park because it's going to be dusk by that time. However, from probably late May through to early August, I'm sure there's going to be people using the park facilities at least till 9 o'clock. And I'm wondering if that could be changed from 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. to allow for public use in the park without any challenges, shall we say.
To Councillor Turley.
I was never in there. So.
The wording of the bylaw from 7 p.m. to 9 a.m. the following day is consistent with the Supreme Court decisions, and any departure from that would probably be inconsistent with the case law of the day.
And second question, if I may, is with regard to the fines for non-compliance. My only question is, do we think they're actually collectible?
The idea of fine sanctions isn't necessarily for collection in every case, But if there's a pattern or history of noncompliance, then the city can look at other measures up to including injunctive action that would result in court orders that could be enforced.
Thank you.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. Through the chair, the only thing is just the smoking is not consistent in this bylaw with the other bylaws where we'll actually talk about cannabis smoking as well. There was another bylaw that was more updated further on, I can't remember, but just a heads up that I think we should be having consistency.
The provisions as they speak specifically to smoking have been removed from the Parks bylaw. There is one section that remains about discarding lighted smoking items that may cause a fire, but there shouldn't be anything about the possession and consumption of smoking products.
Okay.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship, and through you to staff. How does staff plan on implementing and enforcing the bylaw changes that were wrote? Do you plan on patrolling parks, or is it going to be based on complaint?
The patrols through the parks, either by private security, the police, or by patrols have been happening throughout, and there won't be any change to the enforcement approach. What the bylaw amendments do is make our bylaws conform to the case laws that are in place in the province and enable us to take proper enforcement measures and address the removal of chattels if they stay beyond the required hours. It is largely complaint-driven. We know that there's a heavy homeless population in many of our parks, and we'll certainly try to be most responsive to the areas that are most impacted where there are conflicts with other park users.
Thank you.
Nothing further? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Councillor Bonner.
Motion the Parks, Recreation, and Culture Regulation Amendment Bylaw 2019 number 7073.07 pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Motion carried. None opposed. Councillor Bonner.
Do I get paid extra for this? I mean, this is a lot. You do. I do, yeah.
It's all about the honor.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. Motion that bylaw notice enforcement and amendment bylaw 2019 number 7159.04 to update enforcement penalty rates pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Councillor Bonner.
Motion that bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw number 2019 number 7159.04 pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None contrary? Motion carried. Councillor Bonner.
Notice that bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw 2019 number 7159.04 pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carried. The next item is City of Nanaimo Public Nuisance Bylaw 2019, number 7267, and City of Nanaimo Bylaw Notice Enforcement Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7159.05. Mr. LaBerge, again, please.
This report is to present for consideration the City of Nanaimo Public Nuisance Bylaw 2019 number 7267, and to repeal Public Nuisance Bylaw 2003 number 5648, and to present amendments to the Bylaw Enforcement Bylaw 2012 number 7159. The original bylaw was enacted in 2003 as part of the city's liquor control strategy, which was intended to address public disorder issues downtown associated to licensed establishments. This bylaw is an important aspect of our liquor control strategy and is primarily utilized by the RCMP and enforced within the context of the Bar Watch program. The original bylaw set out offenses that included disturbances, the obstruction of persons or vehicles, participating in fights and physical confrontations, throwing bottles or glass, public urination or defecation, and graffiti. This bylaw is 16 years old now and requires some updating. First of all, the recommended penalties would be increasing from $150 for an offense to $250, with the exception of graffiti, which would propose to increase to $500. It provides reasonable excuse provisions for the offense of urination, vomiting, or defecation in situations that are inevitable, and that does not include self-consumption of drugs or alcohol. It also provide for exemptions for lawful picketing as provided for in the BC Labour Code as far as the obstruction of persons or vehicles on a roadway. It would also propose to create new offenses, and this would include nudity in a manner that is offensive to public decency found in section 3.8, dressing or undressing in a public park, swimming pool, or beach as found in 3.9, unlawfully entering a city parkade in 3.10, a chattels obstruction is found in 3.11, or the unlawful consumption of liquor in a park or public space as in 3.12, obstructing a city employee, a bylaw enforcement officer, or peace officer, 3.13, and lastly, smoking in a park, parkade, city property, or within 10 meters of an establishment. Some of the new provisions that were included in this bylaw are found in other bylaws, such as entering parkades, or leaving chattels in public places, or consuming liquor in a public place. In each of these cases, these bylaws are also quite dated and are pending updates, and the intention was to consolidate it into the public nuisance bylaw, which is more aligned to the purposes of these types of offenses. Furthermore, it also provides police with one comprehensive bylaw tool for the downtown disorder. The reason this is significant is that police officers enforce several hundred federal and provincial statutes in addition to our municipal bylaws. And if they're scattered in too many different bylaws, they often overlook some of the important tools that council provides them to deal with matters such as this. I want to just take a moment to give some clarity around the proposed offense of nudity or the undressing provisions. Some of you may be aware that there are criminal code laws regarding nudity. These are seldom enforced, first of all, because the constitutionality of them is questionable, and second of all, it's often deemed to be not in the public interest. The reason that this offense was included is it is something that that we have the authorities of municipality to regulate under Section 64L of the Community Charter, and that speaks to matters of indecency. The intention of this was not to prohibit acts such as nude topless sunbathing, which is more and more acceptable these days, but to prevent exposing oneself in inappropriate environments that are sometimes encountered, particularly in our downtown core, in libraries, in the windows of restaurants, or from somebody changing in a public area of a public pool when change rooms are provided for those purposes. That was the intention of including these types of things. Other municipalities use similar bylaws, and certainly there's discussion that the language of this could be more nuanced, but it's very difficult as you can manage to anticipate every scenario where it may be applicable. I want to stress that these bylaws amendments are substantially intended to address nuisances, disturbances, and uncivil behavior, particularly as they occur in the downtown core and the entertainment district, considering that this area is becoming more and more built up, and we're just experiencing more conflict between high occupancy liquor establishments, the increased number of condominiums and businesses, and the homeless context that we have downtown. And while it is primarily for downtown, these of course may be applicable and enforceable anywhere in the entire city.
Thank you, Mr. LaBerge. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Motion that Public Nuisance Bylaw 2019 number 7267 to update the consolidated offenses related to nuisances, disturbances, and uncivil behavior pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Councillor Bonner.
Motion that public nuisance bylaw 2019 number 7267 pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. LaBerge. Under item 3, general prohibitions, has any consideration been given to private property that has a registered city easement or right-of-way on that property?
My understanding of the interpretation of the bylaw is that it would be applicable to any public place that the public has access, so that would include private property, parking lots, et cetera, yes.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carried. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. And motion that public nuisance bylaw 2019 number 7267 pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carried. Councillor Bonner.
Motion that bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw 2019 number 7159.05 to include new offenses and an updated fine schedule pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Councillor Bonner.
Motion that bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw 2019 number 7159.05 pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much.
You want to do the third one? Motion that bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw 2019 number 7159.05 pass third reading.
All those in favor? Motion carried. The next is cross-connection control amendment bylaw. Mr. Rosen. Good evening. This is one of the more intriguing ones I've seen come across here.
I'll introduce it. So in 2018, Council established the cross-connection control bylaw, and staff started implementation of the program. The purpose of the program is to enhance the safety of the city's drinking water supply system, and it's actually a requirement from VHA. So the purpose of the report tonight, when the bylaw was established, it was envisioned that adjudication of penalties and fines would be through the BC Supreme Court. It's now our understanding that we're going to shift that over to the city's quasi-judicial adjudication process. So these bylaw amendments essentially facilitate that change, and as well there's a couple of little housekeeping items as well. So that's in essence, it's amending the two bylaws to bring that into effect.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Notice that cross-connection control amendment bylaw 2019 number 7249.01 to adopt amendments for consistent enforcement pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carried. Councillor Bonner again.
Motion that cross-connection control amendment bylaw 2019 number 7249.01 pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. Any discussion? Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to staff, and I profess my ignorance on this, so bear with me. Are there any meters that have a backflow preventer installed with them, or is it a totally different scenario?
So, through your worship to Councillor Tully, so I believe you're referring to water meters that would have
Yes.
a backflow prevention device installed with them.
Yeah.
They're generally considered separate devices. It's not unusual to have a backflow prevention device very close to a meter. Quite often meters are installed either at the property line, in a vault, or in a mechanical room. And same thing with the backflow prevention devices, they can quite often be installed at the property line or in a mechanical room.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. When this, I thought I remember when this bylaw came out, it was referring to mostly commercial properties. Does this one seem to be more to everybody? And if so, how are we going to be doing the inspections?
Through your worship, Councillor Bonner, this bylaw applies to all service connections within the city, so residential, commercial, industrial, and institutional. And the way we're approaching enforcement of the bylaw is through sort of risk and prioritization. So the greatest risk tends to show up in industrial and institutional type settings. So as the cross-connection control coordinator proceeds through essentially inspecting and looking at all the connections within the city, he's doing it on a risk-based process. So essentially we'll be looking at industrial and institutional first. Eventually, once we have those in good order, we'll be looking at residential, but that's likely years down the road.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Councillor Kesselbrook.
Through the chair, just curious, are backflow preventer possible to install them like for all new builds and water connections right, after the meter? Is just a general practice with the city going forward, or is that something that is a thought?
Through your worship, Councillor Kesselbrook. Yes, it is a requirement now that new development install backflow prevention devices. It's been a requirement in the building code for separation of fire suppression systems for quite a long time. So we actually, in the city, we already have quite a few backflow prevention devices. So as part of our program, we're starting to track those and monitor those and receive the annual test reports and so on. So I think that answered your question.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. One more question, sorry. Basically, there's probably, even in commercial and in light industrial, a lot of buildings that probably don't meet the standard. And is there any leeway as far as time for compliance? Because there's only so many plumbers in the city.
Through your worship to Councillor Turley. Yes, certainly. So staff are working with the building owners and the building managers to bring them into compliance, essentially. And obviously, the higher the risk, the more urgent it is that they come into compliance. So if staff encounters something that's extremely risky and very urgent, if the building owner or the building manager are not willing to comply within the time frame that we feel is reasonable, that's why we have the enforcement component of the bylaw, so we can essentially force compliance.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Contrary? Motion carried. Councillor Bonner.
Motion that cross-connection control amendment bylaw 2019 number 7249.01 pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carried. Thank you. Councillor Bonner.
Motion
You're
that
doing
by-
yeoman service tonight.
I certainly am. Motion that bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw number 2019 number 7159.06 for ticketing and enforcement of penalty sections of the new cross-contamination control bylaw pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carries. Councillor Bonner.
Motion that bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw 2019 number 7159.06 pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. Any discussion? All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carries. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Motion that bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw 2019 number 7159.06 pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmons. All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Berge. Mr. Rosen.
Done for a while.
The next is the Home-Based Business Regulation Review. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you mentioned, this report is a result of our review of the home-based business regulations. This was actually a motion that was put in place by Council in the spring of 2016, and it was a result of concerns that were raised in the community around one specific proposed home-based business. The regulations that are in our zoning bylaw remain largely unchanged since they were originally adopted in 1993. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Corson to walk through the report and basically give you an outline of the findings of our review and the recommendations.
Thank you very much. Mr. Corson, good evening.
Great evening, Your Worship. Yeah, so as Mr. Lindsay was saying, I'd just like to give you a bit of an overview of how the home-based business regulations work today. Talk to you about the review process that was led by Ms. Manhouse from our Economic Development team, and then talk to you about some of the minor changes that we're looking at implementing. Yeah. So I guess the first part is really how do we define a home-based business in Nanaimo? And there's two definitions. One is it's a business where you actually operate out of your home, and the other is you use your home as a base, but most of your work is done off-site, as if you're a construction contractor or something like that. We have 2,300 home-based businesses in Nanaimo, which is almost 40% of our total business licenses. So it's a very significant sector, one that we haven't really looked at really since '93. So this really gave us a chance to kind of figure out what's working, what's not working of this, an area that employs probably around 3,400 people. So the current regulations are largely in the zoning bylaw, and we'll go into a little more detail, but they're also found in other bylaws such as the sign bylaw and the parking bylaw. And again, these haven't been updated since '93, and they work for the most part, but there are a few areas through the consultation process that we feel could be changed. They are really quite open. There's only really a few prohibited uses at the moment in terms of home-based businesses, and that includes retail, auto body, storage and wrecking, sawmills, and pet services. But pretty much all other uses are allowed from home. So as Mr. Lindsay mentioned, this motion to review the business licenses did come from this committee of the whole meeting, where we had an application for a bakery in a home setting, and council asked us to do this review process. Through the process, we sat down with our staff and kind of looked at the regular, most common concerns that do come up, which is largely traffic complaints people are concerned about, excess parking in the neighborhood, whether it's on one property or around their neighbor's property, and noise impacts are the big ones that we hear from our bylaw services. So the first thing that Ms. Manhouse did to start this process off was she conducted a needs assessment survey, and she sent out an online survey to all the home-based businesses we have in our system, and we had over 442 people respond. So we got a really, really good analysis of what's going on in the community from that perspective. So there's some of the key findings up there for you to look at. But some of the other things to note I found interesting were that the construction industry itself represents 612 business licenses and home-based businesses, as well as professional services with 391. So a lot of these home-based businesses are quite significant. I won't read all this off for you. The next thing we looked at was best practice review. So we looked at 12 different communities across BC to see what they're doing. And it's really a bit of a mix. In the city of Vancouver, home-based businesses are just not permitted outright. And then depending on other communities you go to, the regulations vary. Some are quite silent on it. And then the ones we have up there, which we feel are some good best practice examples, are a little more detailed. And we've borrowed some of their material, which I'll explain in a minute. And then we also conducted some community engagement on this. So we met with the neighborhood associations, had a meeting with the Chamber of Commerce. We held an open house here on December 4th, invited people to come and look at the proposed changes and give us feedback. And then we also posted a survey online that people could take and look at the boards as well. So where we're at now, based on the work that's taken place, I'll just take you through the changes. So what we want to do is integrate a a new classification system. So right now, home-based business regulations apply to every property in the city exactly the same. What we've seen from the best practice is that smaller lots or people living in strata or condominiums probably should have a few more restrictions on their property. The type 2 size is really what your typical standard lot is in Nanaimo, so that's recognizing what's already in place. And then the type 3 are larger lots where we feel there's probably an opportunity to maybe open up and encourage a few more uses and maybe a few less restrictions. So we'll take you through that. So when you see the type 1, you could think of apartments, townhouses, and stratas, and then type 2 is generally your normal lot in Nanaimo, and then type 3 would be the larger lots. So the first, so the second change, I guess, is location and size. So right now, in the bylaw, it's a little confusing as to how much space you can actually occupy in your premise. You're allowed up to 100 square meters or 50% of your dwelling unit, but then it depends if you're in a secondary suite. We have a combined number if you put the two together. So we've come up with this newer category, which should be hopefully a little easier to understand. If you're in a smaller unit, you can have up to 300 square feet. Your typical house doesn't change. It's the same as it is now. And it's an amalgamation. It's not, you can't have one in your suite and one in your house and one in a carriage house and have 300 square meters. It's 100 square meters per property. So hopefully that clarifies things a bit through this process. Another thing we explored were vehicle trips. And right now the bylaw talks to this as having a maximum of 5 regardless. And we feel this could probably be opened up a little bit depending on the businesses, so that we've come back with providing a few more return trips for the regular type 2 lots, and then the larger lots having more opportunity as well. Right now, under non-resident employees, you can have an employee working in your unit. And what we're suggesting here is if you're in a condominium or a smaller unit, you would not have a non-resident employee. So your wife or your spouse could work with you in your condominium, but if you couldn't bring someone else to work in your space. Again, type 2 is where we're at right now, and then the idea is type 3, a larger property. You could have a couple extra non-resident employees working on your property. One of the things we looked at was hours of operation, because we were concerned about, we want to get some feedback if those hours are working. Right now they're set from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. And we didn't receive any feedback whether this should be changed. People seem content with this. Another minor change is signage. So right now you can have 1 sign per business. So if you had 6 businesses on your property, in theory you could have 6 signs. So we're suggesting now it's 1 sign per dwelling. And if you have 6 businesses, you can have 6 names on the sign, but the sign size is the same. And then I think I talked to you a bit about, so these are the current uses that are prohibited under the existing bylaw. So retail, auto body, storage. What we're looking at doing is opening it up, well, I guess we're going to get a little more restrictive on type 1, which again is more of your condominiums, et cetera. And actually prohibit some personal services like doing hair or skin or nails, tattooing from a smaller unit, allowing limited animal services, which means you do that off-site. So if you have a dog walking business from your apartment, that's fine, but you have to go to the other person's house to pick up the animal. You don't bring it back. Type 2, we're not suggesting any changes to type 2. And then type 3, we're looking at opening up a few new uses. So you could have limited retail for products you actually make in the house. And then very limited auto repair, but basically these are people who might do like custom work that doesn't create noise or odors, etc. In terms of parking is probably the biggest issue that came up through the review. And so what we're suggesting is that that the parking for the current regulation is that you need to have a parking spot if you have a home-based business. And we're saying if you have a business that doesn't attract customers and you work out of the house, you should not need to have a parking spot provided. And another regulation we want to add in here too, which came through the review process from some residents, were concerns about shared access driveways where people have been not consulting with their neighbor when they set up a home-based business. So we're going to recommend that if you're applying for a business license and you have a shared easement on your driveway, you have to have the consent of the additional property owner. So those are the main changes, and what we'd like to do is actually take these and formalize these into actual formal bylaw changes for the zoning bylaw, the sign bylaw, and the off-street parking regulations, and bring these back to you at a later date. This was just to really give you a summary of where we're at with this process. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Corson. If we can get the motion as recommended on the table. Councillor Hemmons, seconded Councillor Thorpe. You wish to speak to Councillor Hemmons, or can I go to my list? Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Corson. I'm struggling with a lot of this report. One of the concerns I have is, and when you read the bulletin that went out, it said that health and beauty would be permitted. Now we're saying it's not permitted. Is that correct?
Just in condominiums and small lots, because of the traffic impacts it has.
Because of traffic impact?
So that was one of the main concerns people have is people coming to the property and bringing extra vehicle traffic with them. And if you think of an apartment building where you might only have 1 or 2 guest spots, if you had 6 home-based businesses in there attracting customers, you're creating a bit of a concern in the community.
Because one report says you can have it and the other says you can't, so I'm just confused by that. And my second point, it goes to animals as well. So if I want somebody to pet sit, they can't do it at their house, it has to be done at mine?
So, so pet sitting is not allowed within condominiums. It would be allowed on larger lots. So if you wanted to set up a pet sitting facility, like a business, not that you're looking after someone's dog, but you actually have a pet sitting business, it would be on the larger lots.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Martman.
Thank you. Through the chair, a couple of questions I do have. So you were saying in regards with the change to the personal services, which is hair, nails, etc., but the health services, such as chiropractor, massage, etc., are permitted. So wouldn't the traffic be about the same for both of those?
It's a fair point. It's not necessarily just about traffic. Like, traffic is definitely an issue, but the other issue was just about the actual kind of body fluids, et cetera, and those concerns.
So that was my concern, because either we don't have health services and personal services, or if we're having one, we should offer both. So I'm looking for consistency. And the other, if I may, with the second question, was in regards to vehicles. You make a note for family daycares, which is true. To be compliant, they have to be licensed under the Community Care Act, etc. My understanding is that anybody that works on vehicles from a business perspective must comply with ICBC licensing, with garage policies, etc. So we don't have any, we have something about daycare being compliant, but we don't have anything about working on vehicles being compliant with ICBC.
Yeah, that's something we could certainly add in. Yeah, this is very much high level today, and then the idea is to kind of take this and refine it into the language for the bylaw itself.
Okay, thank you.
That's good feedback.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to staff, I'm just curious if under the prohibited uses of retail store, does that include online retail and pop-up retail?
No, it does not.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Corson. The only reason I'm confused on this because the printed copy that I got under permitted and prohibited uses did not have a type 2 on there. So I'm assuming that all those Hasn't changed, so it's, the personal services are allowed in type 2, is that what you're saying? Okay, thank you.
That's correct, yes.
I'm done.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Corson, if I may. First of all, I recall the issue that prompted this review of our home-based business regulations, and I appreciate the work that staff has put into this because it's a very complicated subject with many components to it, and I like the idea that you have researched best practice in a number of other municipalities. And I understand that we're still fine-tuning. We're not quite there yet. My question is a more general one, and I don't know if you have an answer for me, Mr. Corson, but it seems to me that this is a growth industry, home-based businesses, and I wonder if the city is tracking the number of licenses that are issued, and if we can pinpoint the growth. Is that data available, or could I have that at some future point?
Yeah, I think certainly going forward we'll be able to help you with that, because this is really our first time, actually kind of understanding how many home-based businesses we have in the community. So certainly on a going forward basis, we can keep track of the growth of them and see where we're at. It is pretty significant when you're at almost 40% of our total business license inventory being home-based.
Exactly, and if I may, Your Worship, just to follow up, that's why I think this is a very important review and report. So I appreciate the work that's been done so far, and I think we're definitely on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to staff. I appreciate the report. I was involved in the open houses, and I want to thank you for removing the requirement for people who work online to have a parking space because no one comes to the house. One of my questions is, when we did have an office, the fire department visited us once a year to make sure we had sprinklers were there and fire extinguishers, that sort of thing. Is the city planning to do any type of inspections on home-based businesses where people come into them?
Through your worship to Councillor Bonner, my understanding is whenever you apply for a business license, we do a series of referrals, and depending on the actual business that's being proposed, it then gets referred out to our building inspectors or to the fire department, and they make a judgment if they need to be inspected or not.
Okay. And one other question, if I may. It's regarding the actual licenses themselves. I made a suggestion quite a while ago that it would be really nice if we had more data on the application itself, so that we could track them much better and find out what kind of businesses are doing now. I do think it's a growing business. I think the fact that because we had parking requirements associated with them, it's probably a lot larger than 40%. And I'd hope that all the people out there who are doing work at home do come forward and set up a business. But I would like to see a lot more data gathered when we actually get these business licenses. Thank you.
Certainly.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carries. Thank you. The next is rezoning application number RA 397, 4900 Island Highway North. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you mentioned, the next application is for rezoning of the subject property in order to permit a site-specific amendment to the Community Corridor Core 3 zone in order to permit automobile sales, service, and rental as a permitted use on the subject property. As outlined in the report, staff are not recommending support of this application and recommending that Council deny the associated zoning bylaw amendment. Ms. Rowett, who's our Manager of Current Planning, and Ms. Bhopal Singh, who's a Manager of Community and Cultural Planning, are here this evening, and Ms. Rowett's going to walk you through a brief presentation and introduction to staff's report.
Thank you very much. Ms. Rowett.
Thank you, Your Worship, and members of Council. Good evening. Just for advancing the slides. There we go. It's not very often that we bring forward a rezoning application with a recommendation from staff for denial. This is something we take very seriously and have put a lot of thought into, so I want to make that known at the start. But in considering applications for development, there's a number of city policies and plans that establish the overarching direction and goals for the city and give guidance to staff as well as council members. To start, we have our official community plan, and for the property at 4900 Island Highway, these lands are designated corridor, the intent being to see medium to high-density residential, or more importantly, mixed-use development opportunities, office uses, public spaces to create human-scaled, pedestrian-oriented development, and achieving more efficient uses of land. The corridor designation was established specifically for this use and intended to provide energetic and human-scaled linkages, as described in the OCP, between our urban nodes and neighborhoods. In recognition of the potential land use impacts typically associated with auto sales and service and rental uses, such as noise, aesthetics, and potentially environmental concerns, our OCP directs this use to be more appropriately located within industrial areas. And we have two designated areas I'll show you briefly on a map in the Boban Road and Shenton Road and Boban industrial areas. The OCP's vision for a sustainable community pictures homes located near shops, schools, recreation, work, and other destinations with convenient opportunities for walking, cycling, or taking transit. And fundamental to that is intensification of land uses. Sorry. The city also has Community Sustainable Action Plan, and in their Goal 2 talks about building a more sustainable community. Again, reinforcing the OCP objectives to increase densities and providing higher levels of services and amenities, as well as reducing greenhouse gas emissions by reducing trips and more convenient access to services. In addition, last year, our council at the time approved the city's affordable housing strategy, and this also emphasizes the need to diversify housing options in all neighborhoods and to support housing within mixed-use corridors in close proximity to transit. And as you know, with a very low vacancy rate and strong housing demand that we're experiencing, I think our vacancy rate is at 2.4% last I heard, it's critical that we maximize opportunities to develop sites that are designated for mixed-use developments already to their highest and best use. And this will help us achieve the goals, not only of the OCP, our Transportation Master Plan, but also our affordable housing strategy. I think I missed mentioning the Transportation Master Plan on the first slide, but in there, the site is actually located within the North Nanaimo Mobility Hub. And again, these are areas that have been designated for more intensification of uses in order to support viable transit service. And certainly on the staff side, we've been working actively with the RDN Transit staff to provide more regular communications of development trends that we're seeing in the city. Those have increased exponentially in the last 2.5 years in certain areas, and most of what I'll show you here are just a few examples of what you're seeing right now in our corridors and urban nodes. So very exciting, and certainly working towards making more viable transit service. Given the permitted density in our OCP of 50 to 150 units per hectare, just as a quick example on this site, it potentially could support, if we were just looking at the residential component, maybe 40 to just over 120 units, with or without commercial. So in addition to our overarching plans, we do have zoning already on the site that would allow the highest and best use to be achieved, the community corridor zone. This permits a wide range of uses, residential, seniors care. We have some of this already with the complex memory care facility in place. Retail, restaurant, office uses. In addition to that, there is important reference to make. I think this is a conversation we've had with the applicant about existing auto dealerships in our city. These uses, the auto sales and service use, is not permitted outright as a permitted use in the Core 3 zone, but it is recognized in the bylaw as being permitted on a site-specific basis for a number of these properties that were already existing when the bylaw came in. And that was largely in part to ensure they were not non-conforming when the bylaw was adopted, zoning bylaw 4500 that we are mandated under now. It's also important to note that the auto sales and service rental use in our zoning bylaw, there's allowance for that to sell and service RVs, trucks, trailers, and heavy equipment, as well as mobile homes. So it's not limited to necessarily the business that's proposed today, but would permit other equipment and vehicles as well. The applicant referenced in their rationale about another application that we had a rezoning application for the Medill Industrial Lands at 2560 Bowen Road. This is something that council approved in 2017, and just looking at that as potentially an example for setting a precedent for approving auto sales and service in the corridor zone or corridor designation. Really important to understand that these two projects are significantly different. Just as to give a brief snapshot of that one. Medill involved an OCP amendment. They changed the lands from historically industrial to corridor, as well as rezoning from industrial zoning to corridor zoning. And that was getting us, our community, closer to the vision that was the community vision for that site, being close to major recreational facilities, amenities, and transit and other shops and services. The industrial lands were a brownfield site. This site is not. Again, staff supported the Medill example because it was achieving the corridor designation. It was a comprehensively mixed-use development, and actually only a third of that, I think, was designated for permitting site-specific use for auto sales. And of that, one of those 3 lots included the expansion of the Laird Wheaton dealership and had only 2 of the lots, 2 of the 3 that were potentially for new auto sales. But collectively, they did allow for another 1.8 hectares of land to be established in our city for this use to expand for auto sales. That one also was limited in terms of the road network. There was capacity issues with the Bowen Road and Island Highway intersections, so having the auto dealership use at this time seemed to make sense because it would reduce traffic demands. This site, however, is much different in terms of its location. I've just got a map here to show the distribution of auto sales. But being located near Long Lake, the site is already serviced, has existing access, and is shown there with the red dot. So this map, I just wanted to put up very quickly in reference to the distribution of auto sales throughout this part of the city between Rutherford Road at the top left and Bowen Road approximately down in the bottom. You can see there is a clustering, a large part of our auto precinct, we loosely call it, around the Island Highway and the Bowen Road area. And in green, the 3 lots, those are the Medill lots that were previously approved. This one, however, is on the other side of the Island Highway, immediately adjacent to residential neighborhoods around Long Lake and outside of both the Boban and Shenton Road industrial areas. Moving forward, it would be important to consider how this use, which does require significant land area, can be best accommodated within the city, and whether we want to encourage more of these low-intensity uses in our city, given our limited land base and the fact that we are an infill city in terms of development. Just to give you a reflection on some of the development activity we've seen in the last few years and what is going on right now in terms of corridor development, understanding that. Here's an example at Pacific Station. You can see this was another development very close to the Island Highway. And I don't know if there's a pointer on here, but the top left photo shows the apartment building, 60 units for rental going in there. There's townhouses on the site. I think there's 6 or 7 commercial buildings, has frontage onto Metro Drive as well. So both frontages having highway or major road. The applicant has expressed concerns about the suitability of the subject property for residential development, given its proximity to the highway. But as I'll show you, we have a number of projects that have been readily occupied and actively under construction in such locations in accordance with the vision of the community plan. In this location, we're 400 meters from the subject property. It contains a number of buildings, as I mentioned. Talking with the developer, this site now, given the size of the lot, is actually bigger than the subject property, but if you scaled it down, it's still actually providing a substantial amount of jobs. This was 200 jobs or employees within this development, an estimated $31 million of investment, and no concerns expressed by occupants about traffic noise from major roads or highways. And I actually walked through this site myself, and it's a lovely development. Other developments close to the site on Wills Road, you'll see in the near future an application for a development permit for additional seniors housing, and that's at 4979 Wills Road. It's listed in the staff report, one of the over 600 residential units immediately around the subject property. And in that development, the developer estimates it'll provide, in addition to the housing, they'll hire 50 employees for seniors care, and it will be about $50 million of investment in that project. just in terms of attracting and encouraging investment in the city. There are a number of projects on the go. Other corridor and major road developments, just to show what has been going on. 525 3rd Street, a development that our former council approved, another mixed-use development with student housing and townhouses, a total of 84 residential units. And this is just up from the Aquatic Center on 3rd Street. We also have in, just close to Home Depot, actually this is along Metro Drive, and it's across the street from the Home Depot Staples Commercial Center. Another mixed-use project with 98 units in there as well. And this marries up nicely to some of the improvements that are being looked at for building complete streets and doing improvements along Metro Drive corridor. We have also in the north end, now this one here in particular, unlike the corridors, this one is in the urban node, but just in terms of context, 6975 Island Highway has 3 buildings approved, and we're now at the building permit stage. One is, I think, actively under construction for 151 rental units in total, and this is right in behind the Michaels and Shoppers Drug Mart complex at Woodgrove Crossing, near Woodgrove Mall and near a major transit exchange. Other projects, again, on Uplands Drive, 59 units rental development. This is also under construction right adjacent to the Northridge Commercial Center and near Longwood Shopping Center and on frequent transit routes, major transit routes. 65 Pride Bowen Road, another, actually this one is more of an affordable rental housing project, again on a high-frequency transit route. And bringing us to the subject property at 4900 Island Highway. This has formerly functioned as a highway commercial site, but the OCP and zoning that are in place incentivize more intensive infill development, as we've discussed. The Long Lake neighborhood has evolved over time, as I mentioned, with more than 600 residential units. You wouldn't think it to maybe drive by, but if you take the time to drive through or walk through the neighborhood, it's a beautiful location. Centrally located within walking distance of recreational amenities to the lake, Lakeside Road Trail, residential market for potential businesses, North Nanaimo Town Center, which has seen fantastic revitalization in the last few years. Other local shops and services immediately adjacent, and employment centers and transit. So the site not only supports more intensive development, but specifically looking for what would contribute positively to the character and density and the human scale of the neighborhood that is already there. These are just some pictures of the existing developments that we're seeing around the site, near the site. The memory care on the left, complex care facility. Down on the bottom right is the Songbird residential rental development. And again, you can just see on the edge of the photo, Rutherford Road. I walked by there, interestingly enough, many of those decks, the patio spaces have been personalized. These units, I don't believe, are air conditioned, but people do go out on the balconies and enjoy the space. They have amenities on the site as well. While the proposed auto dealership would benefit from, obviously, the highway exposure from the Island Highway, this form of development, as you can see, is in sharp contrast with the contemporary forms of corridor developments emerging in this neighborhood and throughout the city. The size and dimensions of the property would also provide sufficient site area to not only achieve a mixed-use development, but with comparable setbacks for residential development from the highway as other existing single-family and multifamily developments along the highway. So if you were to look along that edge, the same flexibility could be achieved within the site. In conclusion, there are, this is the first redevelopment opportunity I think we've seen in over 40 years, given the longevity of this site from the Long Lake Nursery. And the proposed low-intensity auto-oriented use in this location doesn't meet the intent of the city's strategic priorities or council's policies and the community's vision to achieve a more complete and livable city and to shape Nanaimo's future, as quoting from the plan, as a progressive urban and cultural community. The OCP and other policies governing land use and transportation, as I noted, don't support rezoning for this use in this location. It's not that staff aren't supportive of the use, aren't business friendly, but looking at our policies and objectives in this location, it's not a suitable location for this use. This development would preclude the ability to achieve a walkable mixed-use development, a diversity of housing options near existing services, employment, transit, and recreation at Long Lake. It would detract from the human scale of the corridor and the character and development pattern established in the Long Lake neighborhood. It would introduce potential land use conflicts with the neighborhood. For example, truck movements immediately adjacent to seniors' housing, potential aesthetic impacts, although the buildings will obviously be designed in high-quality design. The site itself will have quite a bit of surface parking, as potentially also noise from the repair services. There are limited community amenities provided beyond what would already be required with the required works and services and stormwater management with any redevelopment of the site. In order to achieve a functional road network and pedestrian facilities such as sidewalk and bike lane, the proposed amenity contribution would be is suggested to be directed towards a section of Wills Road that is off-site to complete the sidewalk network and potential upgrades to an existing transit stop, not a new transit stop. The concern is that the proposed rezoning would also set a precedent for encouraging more auto sales service uses to be located outside auto precincts and just the speculation along the Island Highway corridor. We want to move away from the historic image of Nanaimo as one long highway dotted with malls and car dealerships. The net impact, from staff's opinion, on the community sustainability and the neighborhood livability in this location outweigh the economic benefits. And it would be a step backwards from the community vision and a lost opportunity to add density and additional services to a growing neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a number of other delegations. I think questions for staff can wait, Ms. Gurry, correct? The first of the delegations is Mr. Holland to speak on behalf of the owner. I would remind all the delegations you have 5 minutes. At 4 minutes, the light will change, and I will remind you very politely and briefly and quickly to wrap up, and you're in the minute remaining. Mr. Holland, good evening.
Thank you, Your Worship. Worship Council, my peers in the planning profession, it's a real pleasure here to talk with you. This policy discussion has evolved extensively. This council report is significantly larger than the first ones. I'm going to have a hard time fitting this into 5 minutes, but I will do my best. As staff have outlined, just before I get started, this is for the Gain Group, a very respected business, philanthropic business with ties to the university here. Just before I get started, I'm not going to ask everyone to speak, but I'd just like a show of hands of who's here in support of this proposal.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
This industry, this business is well connected through the community. They give a lot back. A lot of families' incomes are reliant on this. So the discussion that auto dealerships and malls and the businesses are ugly and should be considered less than, I find really rather unattractive. I think we can do better than that. What's proposed is 2 auto dealerships, 2 new ones, including a new luxury brand. In discussion with staff, they wanted more intensity, and I agree with that as a planner. So we went back to the owner, and the owner agreed to add a pre-owned dealership, additional parking to handle the density, and are bringing in additional jobs and office space from around the region to be located here to achieve that intensity. Here's a 3D model of basically how it will fit its appropriate scale to the whole area, and as staff noted, it will be high quality. Staff have noticed some of the community improvements that we'd like. We'd like to upgrade the transit stop. There's about 75% of the buildings, or of the occupants in the nearby buildings are seniors. They take transit. Many of them walk up the east side of Wills Road, so we'd like to have that upgraded for them, because right now there's no sidewalk there. The transportation study, it's not in your council package. I'm happy to provide that. It noted that at peak hour, there would only be 1 additional car per minute. So I went actually out to the sidewalk with the members of the Waterton Key, and we watched our clock, and we counted it down, and they started chuckling at about 45 seconds, realizing this was not going to be a traffic hell. There's sort of 1 car per minute, slightly less in the morning, slightly over in the evening. This meets all of your OCP policies. Contrary to staff's position on this, this in fact does meet your OCP policies. It increases job density in the core. The Long Lake Nursery had roughly 7 FTE jobs by our estimate. We're bringing 70. This is a 10-fold increase in the employment density in this corridor, which is the purpose that staff have spoken to. It increases walkability, mixed uses. It enhances the public realm. It increases your tax base. It works closely with the Long Lake hydrology. The subsequent runoff from this site will match an old growth forest. The zoning it also meets, and this is where it gets a bit sticky here in working with staff. There are 44 allowable uses within the Core 3 zone. it is highly unusual that staff would attempt to block an application because one of the uses is not in there. This would be the equivalent of trying to block an application because it doesn't have a laundromat. The two-story limit we meet, the appropriate parking provisions we meet. In fact, we exceed them in order to mitigate parking problems in the area. All other issues we meet. Staff's points of opposition are threefold, as you've heard. They insist that it must include residential, be higher density, and that the industrial, notwithstanding their support of the Medill site, that the auto should go into 2 industrial areas. Now, it's not appropriate that staff cherry pick through 44 uses to the one that they want, and then they built the majority of this presentation around that. All the photos of residential. This is not a residential application. This is for auto dealerships. There are 2 types of sites in the core 3 zones. Some of them serve regional uses, those along highways. You don't want your regional uses coming into your neighborhoods. You want those for neighborhoods. This is one of those sites. It has a core 3 zone, but it is different than the neighborhoods. The majority of Nanaimo is neighborhoods. This needs to serve your regional role. The residential context, it was interesting that staff are opposing this for residential, or they want residential. Actually, the entire surrounding area is residential, and by staff's presentation, there's 600 new units right immediately nearby going in. What's the problem is this is an unhealthy site for residential. If any of you caught the Nature of Things 10 days ago, the pollutants that come from car exhaust are so small in their micron size that they actually pass the blood-brain barrier and get into your brain. They are statistically proven in studies in numerous countries to contribute to mental problems, to COPD, to many illnesses, including dementia. This is not discussed. I've raised this with staff on the noise. This is muchly, I'm part of the Healthy Built Environment Alliance Steering Committee. We're reviewing new standards for this. Jobs are far more hard to get. The idea that residential is going to give you transit is wrong. Transit connects jobs and residential. In 150 years of planning, what we've learned is it's much harder to get jobs than bedrooms. And so through this process, we think that the jobs provided in this corridor are far better than the residential. The higher density reality would be a 3-story, 4-story building that was 65% covered in parking lots. There's no land in Bowen.
I hate to tell you, but you run out of time, but I'm sure that council will have questions for you.
Fair enough. I've given you a copy of my presentation. I also included the handouts from the public meeting that we held. Staff omitted all of that information, so that's there for you as well.
Thank you. We have
a
all of that.
request is that you allow us to go to public hearings so you can hear from the community.
Don't go away.
Question.
Questions?
Sorry.
Never move away from Mike. It's one thing you learn in politics. Councillor Armstrong.
And thank you for your presentation once again. And because staff had raised some concerns, you added what do you call it there? Your used car sales.
Yes.
That's an additional one. Will that impact your traffic study?
Through your worship, no. That was included in the traffic study. Everything proposed was included in the traffic study.
Thank you.
No further questions. Thank you very much. Councillor Gesselbrock. You've got to learn to hit that
You got to
line.
push your button. Oops.
Well, you've just haven't turned yourself on. No, you'll have to. I can't
Through the
turn
chair to the delegation, I'm curious, how are the cars transported to the site? Is it through a semi-truck that comes into the area?
Through your worship, yes, they are through the same kind of trucks that deliver the cars to most dealerships. We specifically have designed the site so that all loading and unloading will occur within the site. Staff raised this issue earlier. All of this will occur within the site, will not impact Wills Road or any of the other properties anywhere nearby. We've also upped the parking standard because some of the workers that work in this area are parking in the retail spots already in the surrounding plazas. The retail stores are unhappy about that, so we've got the on-site loading and increased parking, so it'll be minimal, no impact on the surrounding areas from the transportation.
And the 70 jobs proposed at the new site, I understand the Subaru dealership that's currently in the Shenton Road area will be moving locations. Is that 70 jobs on top of what's already there, or is that inclusive of everything?
Through your worship, yes, it'll be 70 new jobs that are brought into the city here from that process. The Subaru dealership will move over. It brings with it about 30 jobs currently. It'll expand to close to 37 by the estimate. The Mini, BMW, and Mercedes dealerships that are also part of the Gain Group's portfolio will now expand. They're completely out of land. So they will back hire the remaining 30 that come out. We then add a luxury car dealership, which will bring likely another 30 plus the pre-owned car sales as well. So those will be 70 new jobs. All of them are over living wage.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you once again, Your Worship, through you to the delegation. I just wanted to touch on that. I know that you did a lot of work previously before you had your open house where you spoke with residents, whatever. What was the support for the dealership versus apartments?
So I have met with pretty much all the businesses around in person and delivered packages twice of information. I had emails and conversations with many of them about this. I met with the Waterdown Key. Widston Property Management got me in touch with both of them. Lakeside Villas really doesn't organize very well. They almost don't have strata meetings, but Waterdown Key does. And so I met with a group of them for about an hour and a half. We walked the site. We walked all around. They talked about all the different issues. You can tell that I'm a policy-based person, so I wanted to know what their reaction would be to this alternative. Well, there isn't a proposal for residential on the table. But council staff are supposing there could be one. So I asked them about that. I would say half the group was, the word I would use, and I don't want to overphrase this, hostile was the word. They immediately went no. It would block their views, it would block their southern sun in the wintertime, and it would now provide overlook of 3 stories of houses now looking into all of their back windows and the entrances to their units. So their reaction was negative. That doesn't mean that that's not good city policy with those kinds of things. We all struggle with intensification, but that was the reaction I got. At the public meeting, we had, as you'll see there, we had 28 cards filled in. I've given you all of them there. Including the actual scans of every single one of them. So you have all of that. 26 were in favor. Of the 2 people I talked to who were not in favor, one, I immediately asked, well, where do the car dealerships go? That's really a core question here. He said, Duncan. So the conversation did not go very much further with that. The other woman came forward and said that the whole area is now all residential and we shouldn't put any more commercial. So this is, again, not consistent with staff's policies. So I don't know which building she lived in at that time in my conversation, but those are the only 2 we got against it at that
Thank
meeting.
you.
Sorry, Councillor Turley, you hit your button when I hit your button, so you're going to have to turn yourself on.
Okay, now I'm on. Yes, Your Worship, through you to Mr. Holland. I did a little trip today and discovered that there are 14 new and used dealerships within 2 kilometers of this site, which I'm sure you know. My question is, given that the vehicles are delivered to the various dealers on semi-trucks, is it likely that that truck would be going to more than one dealership delivering vehicles, or is it usually just one dealership that's on a load?
I'm not in that logistics industry, but from what I know of it, it could go to one or it could go to several. So I'm sorry, that would be an it depends answer to that, depending on what the load is. Given the Gain Group do bring in vehicles for numerous dealerships in the city, they're a key part of that sector of this city. It's likely that there might be more than one stop.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to a delegation. Has the owner made any attempt to purchase land in any of the other areas that staff has suggested?
Thank you, through Your Worship. They have. They've been working with Randall Taylor from NAI for 3 years to try and buy land in that area. In the piece that I didn't get to cover, this was one of, to me, the most important issue here, is that the Boban and Shenton areas have no land available. There has not been any land for sale that this group could get. The more troubling part of it is that every planner in British Columbia knows you do not introduce higher value uses into industrial areas if you want to keep the industrial businesses, because BC Assessment then takes the value of the last bid up sale and revalues all the land. Your industry and commercial pay 3x what your residential pay in taxes, so your taxes then suddenly shift to the commercial. They get passed through to the small family businesses in those industrial areas. They're being forced out of every growing city now. It's the #1 reason why industry leaves. A policy to move high-value luxury auto retail into these areas is arguably against your own OCP's policy, which says retail should not be considered in industrial areas. There's a clause which says it may be considered in the Shenton and Boban areas. This is a far cry from staff suggesting that policy says shall and shall only be. And your worship as a man of the law will know that on the policy continuum between may be considered and shall only be is a very, very large continuum. And I'm mystified why this is the argument. So they have tried. The value of that land has gone up by nearly 20, maybe 25% in the last 24 months. That means that every new budget item that comes through this city will go straight through to the families who run those storage businesses, run all the businesses in that area. And if GAIN has to bid this up, and they can, if they do into that area, then it will affect all of the businesses in all of those industrial areas through the BC assessment process.
Thank you. One other question for me. How many parking spots, I'm assuming that you're going to be putting cars out so that people can see them as they're driving by. How many actual parking spots will you have on the area?
So we have surface parking on about 60% of the site, and we've added a structured parking as well. It's kind of partly, you can't really put underground parking on this site because the water table of Long Lake is high, and we have to stay 1.5 meters above that. So it's kind of a half-buried parking structure. This allows us to get, what's my parking numbers? I believe that 157 are required, and I think we're providing 163, so it's just slightly over. And again, that was for concerns of the 70 employees who would come to these, make sure that they're not parking in the neighborhood. They're on the transit line. Some may choose to take transit, as staff have argued. There's a lot of transit in the area.
Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Mr. Holland. I'm just curious if any effort has been made through sort of the pre-planning stage. I understand we're just talking about use at this point, but obviously I think due diligence, you've done some planning on site configuration. If any effort has been made to configure the site in a manner which could accommodate future site intensification or additional uses as they make sense over time.
We've looked at that. The issue with auto dealerships is that they come with a package requirement of the building from the original auto dealership. So the developer will build what the auto dealership wants. So in this case, Subaru has a very distinct look and feel and size. It's optimized through their algorithms of business. Likewise, the luxury auto dealer that's currently in negotiation for that site has their own plans. We looked at trying to figure out, could we add residential or something to that site afterwards? The problem is that, as we all know, auto dealerships are not a neighborhood use. They're not intended for that purpose. That's why they're all clustered around the highways and those main intersections. That's not, even though we'll increase the walkability of the area significantly through the contributions, the actual site is not a neighborhood use that you go to daily unless you work there. So the auto dealerships don't tend to try and fit into those kinds of environments. And in this case, we were unsuccessful at figuring out how we could fit the parking for this intensive use, as well as more parking for more residential into the site. Its access would be compromised, the loading would be compromised. There was no way we could find a way to put them in. The compromise was the landowner agreed to pull in, to expand the office facilities on the second floor, to add the pre-owned dealership, and to draw in jobs that are else. They've got holdings all across the island. They want to centralize the office uses here with respect to the city's goal of intensifying the use. And again, the jobs support transit as much as bedrooms. If bedrooms supported transit, we'd have transit everywhere in Nanaimo. It's the jobs, 150 years of planning. It's hard to get jobs. That's what turned the Garden City to a garden suburb. This is providing jobs. So we're excited about that possibility in this case, but this site doesn't lend itself to both and.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
This will be my last, I hope. Thank you, through you, Your Worship. You mentioned that this site is not good for underground parking, is that correct? So even if it was apartment building, it would also have to be surface parking? Thank you.
Through Your Worship, on that, an underground parking stall costs about $40,000 to build these days. It can be more than that. The ones that Town Line's building in downtown Victoria right now are 80 and 100 when they're down at P5. So the Has-Beens coffee shop we all love just across the street from this, they're about 1,000 square feet. They would require by your parking bylaw roughly 10 parking spaces at 300 square feet each and $40,000. That would be close to $500,000 in mortgage that their scones and tea and coffee would have to pay for. No bank would lend you the money to build that because no one could afford to pay for that, so it would be on the surface.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holland.
Thank you, Your Worship, Council.
The next delegation, properly speaking, is Kim Smythe, the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Smythe, not your first appearance. You know what the rules are?
First appearance in a while. Thank you very much for my 5 minutes, Mayor, Council. Good evening. Pleasure to come and speak with you tonight. Nanaimo is often acknowledged as a business capital of Vancouver Island, north of the Malahat. However, we've not earned nor achieved this status through many particular deliberate actions, but through default, mainly due to our enviable location and historic infrastructure. The attractiveness of our community to hold the stature and to build on it in order to grow our economy is contingent on how we practice business retention as a portion of economic development. How do we continually keep making Nanaimo a great place to live, play, and work? How do we maintain a level playing field for business in Nanaimo? How do we attract best-in-class business? How do we make the provincial and national business communities aware that Nanaimo is a progressive and productive place to locate and grow your business? How do we inspire startups and entrepreneurs to invest significant interest in our local economy? And why should all of those things even be important to us? Because we all know that Nanaimo, as a community, struggles on so many fronts due to our seriously low median family household income. We also struggle with unusually high commercial tax rates compared to like-sized cities in British Columbia. These two problems are intrinsically connected. We need to attract more business to our community and then support them in order to earn retention and grow our economy while broadening our tax base. A focus on business retention is an important consideration when you create your new vision for the city's economic development plans. While we develop strategies for recruiting new business in our city, let's make sure we're not ignoring the health and interests of existing businesses and impeding their growth. Let's not engage in actions that would be considered precedent to portraying an ambivalent attitude toward the success of businesses already invested in our community. We have a significant housing affordability problem in our community, and I know it's on your minds daily. Essential to solving this for the long term is to improve that underperforming household family income metric. Underemployment is partly to blame for that. Attracting businesses that create jobs and careers that support families will help us begin to overcome that problem. I'm here tonight on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce and the business community to encourage Mayor and Council simply to move this to a public hearing so the community can comment and react on these proposals. Then we can see how they may suggest we help broaden Nanaimo's commercial tax base and take pressure off of residential taxpayers. Take action to increase jobs and career opportunities for Nanaimo residents, and send a clear signal to those outside of Nanaimo that we're ready to welcome new business, support those who have chosen to locate here, and help ensure the sustainability and growth of all economic activity in our community. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Smythe. Any questions? Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, through you to Mr. Smythe. Do you think if this council denied the application that would have a negative connotation to businesses, that Nanaimo's not business friendly? Is that what I was taking from you?
I don't think it's that easy of a connection, but repeated actions that do not give an opportunity for business to present their case substantially, such as in public hearing, does get around the business community, of course. And we've had significant challenges in attracting business to our community in the past.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Smythe. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
The next is Mr. Murchie, another delegation. Mr. Murchie, 5 minutes. At the 4-minute mark, the light will change, and I will politely suggest you have a minute left. Good evening.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, Mayor and Council. Give you a handout. I'm going to talk about the property, the neighborhood, the larger neighborhood, dealerships, I'm going to go over some numbers, and then city impacts. This is a large corner property, as you're aware, on Wills Road, west of Long Lake. It's a key property for ensuring the walkability of the neighborhood. It's a fantastic property for both high-density housing and for small street front businesses. This neighborhood is a distinct geographic area which is bounded by the highway, Rutherford Road, and Long Lake. It has very limited access and is serviced exclusively by Wills Road. The north end of Wills Road going into Rutherford Mall is the only exit.
Neighborhood's connections are to the mall to the north, and Long Lake to the south and southeast. There's no access from the highway except to come in. Malls, jobs, schools, and the lake are all within walking distance. The neighborhood is currently 100% residential and commercial. The OCP plan envisioned cohesive and coherent growth through densification. The Long Lake Nursery site is defining property for this neighborhood and is particularly well suited for a mix of street front stores and high-density residential. A car dealership would be incongruous in just about every sense to this location. Housing and small business. My family used to have a business in the Richmond Auto Mall for years selling coffee and stuff, so I know what it's like in that kind of environment for small business. There's a real shortage of affordable housing in Nanaimo. Zoning which requires increased residential densification is the best and most effective tool any level of government has in the fight against crippling housing costs and urban sprawl. Small businesses need a variety of commercial spaces to thrive. The OCP and its corridor zoning helps give Nanaimo small businesses the spaces they need. I heard earlier how many people are working at home. I wondered how much of that's because they don't have spaces. The neighborhood is not part of Bowen Road Auto Row. There are no car dealerships in the Wills Road Long Lake neighborhood. The nearest dealerships require almost a kilometer of driving to get to by car. You look at the map and they're close, but when you actually map it out by car, Galaxy's is just about a kilometer, the same with Volkswagen. The rest are close to 2 kilometers or 4. Currently, there's no reason to enter the Western Long Lake Wills Road neighborhood for any type of automobile-related business. A primary premise for this application appears to be that the property is part of a self-defined automobile district. The idea that this property should be considered an extension of Bowen Road Auto Row because an isolated dealership is visible a kilometer's drive away is not one which should be entertained. BC assessment valuations. I have a printout of what I did here. I didn't want to embarrass anybody, so I didn't hand it out with the other one. So I scanned the 20 dealerships I could identify from memory through BC Assessment and the city's website, and I averaged them all out what the valuation was per hectare. That's just under 1.6 million. That was about 20 dealerships. I used one small aged house, my own, that lives in the area as a valuation, and that works out to 2.1 million per acre valuation, of course, in BC Assessment. I took, it's something different in the city, 4 different properties, one on Metro that wasn't discussed by the mall, it's quite by a school, 2 by Country Club, and another one farther down the road, all highway frontage ones. They averaged 5.6 million per hectare. Big winner there. So the residential commercial ones, dramatically more valuable than dealership properties. Most dealership property values appear comparable to single-family residential or less. Property assessment valuations do not suggest a scarcity of car dealership land. Car dealerships, how many? So I tried to get StatsCan information. What I could find was about 3,600 in Canada. That's about 1 per 10,000.
Less than 1 minute.
Thank you. To be average, Nanaimo needs 7 to 9 dealerships. The applicant stated in a previous presentation there's 21 dealerships in Core 3 zoning alone. That's 3 times what we need to be average. The numbers suggest high-density residential is the highest property tax value and the biggest budget benefits. High-density residential projects are needed to make housing affordable again. Housing affordability is a citywide issue. High-density housing is the best option for the city's communities and budget, both short and long-term. 2900 Island Highway and Wills Road should be a high-value mixed residential commercial site which adds value to both its neighborhood and the city for decades to come. Thank you for the opportunity to present.
Thank you, Mr. Murchie. Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Curry, if I can just confirm, the recommended motion is that council deny the application. However, phrasing it in a positive light, if a member of council made the motion that simply changed the deny to approve, that would have the effect, a positive effect. Is that correct?
Your Worship, in the staff report, there is an alternate option, number 2, and if if council wished to not move staff's recommendation, number 1, they could instead move and second and vote on option 2.
I'm in council's hands as to who wishes to make the appropriate motion that they think appropriate. Sorry?
She's there than me.
Councillor Armstrong, you're first.
I will defer to,
You'll defer to Councillor Martin.
then I'll speak after.
So, if I may, I would like to put forward the motion. I'm not going to say that I'm...
Which motion?
Oh, I'm going to put forward the option number 2, that council grant first and second reading to zoning amendment bylaw 2019, number 4500.131, to rezone 4900 Island Highway North in order to permit site-specific automobile sales, service, and rental use, and direct staff to secure the community contribution road dedication and rights-of-way prior to the adoption of the bylaw, should council support the bylaw at third reading.
Second.
Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Armstrong.
And if I may speak to that, I'm putting forward the motion because I believe we should give it first and second reading and go to a public hearing. I'm not saying I've made up my mind one way or another, but I want to hear more from the public. Thank you.
Mr. Rudolph.
I just want to clarify this. This is really a decision at this point, if council is willing to proceed this to a public hearing. It's not to approve it. It's just approve it to go to, I think the motion, the wording may be, the first and second reading is appropriate, but the effect of that is to forward it to a public hearing where you will have or be duly noted and advertised, and everybody that has an interest would have the full opportunity to speak. So just for clarity purposes, I think really what you're doing is, that's what you just said, but I just want to make sure that it was clear that it's not inferring an approval process. It's just, the decision is, are you prepared to refer it to public hearing, yes or no?
Thank you. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a whole list here. I don't know if you want me to do one at a time or just speak. I'll speak.
You speak.
Okay, so
We'll listen.
the first item is kind of a correction and some additions. Because of my longevity in this community, I probably have more historical influence than anybody. First of all, Long Lake Nurseries was opened in the early 60s, not in 1975, which I already passed along to Dale. Probably some of the confusion came, the original owners were Doug and Betty Jones, and they sold to the Hilchys around about 1975, so that may be where the issue came. The other one comes under the site-specific zoning, where you're referring to the Medill property being a brownfield, surrounded by existing industrial uses and car dealerships. Well, I have to add that there's also backing onto that property businesses and locations like St. John's Ambulance, Haven House, Nanaimo Home Center, a provincial government office, plus across the street on Labview, some parkland, so probably we should put those in there as well. With regard to, where was I going to go next? Okay, so I guess I don't like to say this, but I've had 42 years experience as a local business owner, operator, and I do know, I believe, the difference between an impulse business location and a destination business. And in my opinion, this site is only going to be successful with a single destination business site. Trying to put multiple either destination or impulse sites on this particular one because you're approaching a stoplight. And I'll give you an example of how people don't see things. Turley's Florist, which I apologize for, I'm not the owner anymore, so, opened a garden center back probably about 10 years ago, and we started hanging up hanging baskets in the thing. I don't know how many people came in the store to say, "Oh, are you new? We didn't know you're here," but they've driven by continuously because of something changed, and so that's why I'm saying, in my opinion, I don't believe this site is suitable for a group of small, whether they're impulse or destination businesses. Secondly, or thirdly, I did briefly mention through Mr. Holland about the trucks, and some people say, "Oh, we don't need another car dealership," and really that's not council's decision to make. I believe our decision is to decide where it's going to go, and the fact that we have 14 new and used dealerships within 2 kilometers of each other, one of which is right across the street, Harborview Auto House, tells me that customers, usually when they're looking for a vehicle, will probably travel to several lots to check things out. And the last thing we want to have them doing is running from Chase River to Woodgrove to do that checking out. And as Mr. Holland said, the potential is there for group deliveries to dealerships within this small area. The last thing I want to mention is under the Transportation Master Plan. I do have a question for staff. They refer to this proposal to be adjacent to the Country Club Mobility Hub. In my travels today, it was just over 2 kilometers away, and I don't particularly think that's adjacent, but maybe I'm misunderstanding something.
Mobility Hub has different focal centers, so there is obviously a more concentrated location immediately at the heart of the Mobility Hub, and then as you branch out, it sort of peters off a little bit, but this is still within the identified Country Club Mobility Hub. It's closer to the center of the North Nanaimo one, but it is within, between the two.
So you're saying that a hub is not necessarily where the transit exchange is that what you're saying?
It would be considered as part of the transit service area. I would imagine that that's probably the best way to describe it. Yep.
So the other thing the last thing I'll say, I promise, is there's a mention here of being within 150 meters of the E&N Trail. And according to my measurements today, there are 10 dealerships already within that distance. And there's only one that I could think of that I could see that would have the same challenge of getting to the trail as the proposal is, and that's the Nissan dealership because it's across the highway. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. So just a point of procedure here. The motion that is on the floor that's been moved and seconded, I actually need it to be broken into 3 because it is a bylaw reading. You're going to give first and second reading to this bylaw, and then you're going to direct staff to proceed with the community contributions, and then it automatically goes to public hearing after that. So for a point of process and clarification, if the motion on the floor could be that council give first reading to zoning amendment bylaw 2019 number 4500.131 to rezone 4900 Island Highway North in order to permit site-specific automobile sales, service, and rental use past first reading, if the mover and seconder could agree that that's the motion on the floor, then you could proceed to second reading after that.
I see vigorous nodding, and I think we have agreement.
Thank you.
All those in favor of the motion? Sorry?
That was the first reading.
We'll discuss it second.
So just to further clarify, so there's no confusion on council, Councillor Markman moved option number 2 that's in the staff report, which is just combining 3 motions required from council into one, and that it's been moved and seconded and now voted in favor, just the first reading, because I just got clarification that we're breaking that one motion into 3.
Thank you. All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carries.
Now I move the second.
Please.
And just to read it out so it's on the record, it's that council is going to give second reading to zoning amendment bylaw 2019 number 4500.131.
So moved, seconded. Councillor Armstrong? Discussion.
Thank you. I support this. I think I've been very vocal about this in the past. I do not believe an apartment building is a good location there. I think the traffic problems would be phenomenal. We are already seeing lots of traffic issues with the buildings on Metro Drive. Parking issues are huge there. I think it would increase a lot of issues. I think this business is well suited there. That being said, I would like to wait till the public hearing before I do make up my final mind, but I do believe it's a good partnership with VIU. I believe it brings lots of good businesses to the community. I also think that we have to remember that this is a business that draws people from all over the island to our community, which means they will be spending more dollars in our community as well, because it's a dealership, if what I'm led to believe is correct, the luxury dealership, the only closest one would be either go to Vancouver or down to Victoria. So I think that would be a driving factor in bringing people to Nanaimo. I also like the fact, again, I think I said it, the partnership with VIU, and I think it's well-paying jobs, and we quite often speak about our poverty child rate here, and this is a way to help bring that up. So as of now, I believe this is a good use of land. However, I'll wait till the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've given this file a great deal of thought over several weeks, well, longer than that, and I have to say I have a lot of reservations both ways, and I find myself tonight in an awkward position because if I vote against the motion as it stands now at second reading, I am showing a closed mind to this project because defeating this motion would end the project. I'm not sure that I am in favor of the project, with all due respect to the need to create jobs and the economic card that's being played, and with respect to the support from the automobile dealership representation here tonight, that's well and good. But we have to be cognizant of the best use of this property for the city overall. At this moment, I'm not convinced that a car dealership is the best use for this piece of property. I respect Mr. Holland, and I was impressed with the project. I think there's a lot of good things about it. I am not convinced this is the right place for it. So I suppose I will support the motion to move it to a public hearing, because to do otherwise, as I said, does not show an open mind. But I will need to be convinced that having another car dealership in a section of our city which is not covered in our official community plan, which is not supported, I'm hearing, by the neighborhood association, which does not jibe with our transportation master plan and other elements that our staff have brought forward, I'm going to have to really be convinced. And I do not go against recommendations from our staff lightly. So I certainly weigh that as well. That said, I suppose I'll have to support moving it to a public hearing. Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a couple of questions. I'm of the same opinion. I haven't made my mind up yet on this one. I will support the motion only so that it can go to public hearing. Staff mentioned in their report it's possible to put between 40 and 120 units on this property. Looking up our new off-street parking bylaw, if these were two-bedroom units, if we put 120 units in there, we'd be looking at 195 parking spaces required for that place. And I'm looking at the map, and I'm just not sure if that's a number that could be actually supported on there, especially if we're being told that they can't really do underground parking.
Maybe through the chair. Absolutely, you're right. The range there is really based on what the community plan would support in principle. The feasibility of that does need to be proved out, but just for comparability, the site that we have an application for 2 doors down is proposing 3 doors down, is just over 100, 120, I think it is, residential units in there, and they are doing underground parking. So depending on the site and how it sits, it is possible to achieve some underground parking. The water table is higher, but it doesn't preclude it entirely, or even under building parking, which is another option that we're seeing maybe a little more cost-effective on other projects throughout the city.
And one other question, if I may. It has to do with the community contribution amenity, which I'm always kind of interested in. And I think car dealerships are the absolutely only business in the world that takes all their products and sticks it outside, rain or snow. To me, that is commercial use of a space. So I think that the community amenity should reflect the entire lot as opposed to the actual building where they probably won't have any of their products other than 1 or 2 cars sitting in there. So to me, I think the community contribution should be based at $34 per meter, and it should be $291 and $108. to $291,108. So I don't know if that's an option at all, but because of the nature of the business, I think they're using all of the space for commercial.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I have both a question and then some comments. So my question first through you to staff. Is it typical for a business to purchase land that requires a rezoning in order to make use of the space as they want it to be?
Through the chair, so you mean just preemptively buying the land before the zoning is approved? We deal with a number of inquiries. Some people that come to us, it is on a pre-purchase basis or maybe very close to a purchase. They may be negotiating a purchase. We give our best advice as quickly as we can based on the policies and zoning that we have. And in this case, we engaged with a number of consultants prior to the one Mr. Holland we heard from tonight for this particular site, and gave the same messaging from the beginning prior to the purchase of the property, as well as subsequently and after the application was submitted.
Okay, thank you. And if I may, just some comments. I echo the thoughts of Councillor Thorpe in this. I'm not yet convinced. I think as council, it's our job to take the long view, and I find there's compelling arguments on both sides. But the long view for me is Nanaimo, to its detriment, really is seen by many outside of the community as a mall, after a car dealership, after another mall. And for me, I'm really interested in building a cohesive and livable and complete city. And I don't know that another car dealership in an area that we have identified as possibly having other uses, I don't know that that's in our best interest. However, I don't believe I can really vote against this because that would indicate a closed mind, and I am really interested in hearing from the public on this. And so I guess my last point would be to say that I really appreciate that all the supporters have come tonight, and I would strongly encourage anyone with an investment in having opposing views heard, that the public hearing is your opportunity to do that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Unlike a couple of my fellow councillors, I'm not of the opinion that I do need to have an open mind to consider the application for first and second. With that said, I do have some thoughts. The first of all is I think we are in an awkward situation with respect to the policy context, and also from a planning perspective, I do struggle with viewing this as a walkable area. Rutherford Road is 6 lanes, and you know, I don't even know the width of the right-of-way, but it is significant. On the other perpendicular to that, we have the Island Highway with 2 service roads, and then the lake, which I think can quickly be viewed as a feature, but planning around any sort of water line is extremely difficult for community cohesion, and often can be seen as the equivalent of a highway. So I do struggle with that planning context, but then I also understand that, as Councillor Hemmons highlighted, that we do need to take the long view with these sort of things, and building a more cohesive, livable community starts with parcel by parcel. But we are considering first and second reading. Like my fellow councillors, I do not know if I can support this application as is, but I am interested in possibly advancing it with the hopes that through the public hearing process, through the applicant's considerations of council's decision tonight, and maybe council's comments and the public's comments, and also some of the policies in the OCP, which I do believe have some merit and have some value for consideration, that a more creative approach to the development of the site that could potentially accommodate this use, but also work towards some of those policies in the OCP. So I would be in support of moving this past first and second reading, but like some of my fellow councillors have articulated, I do not know at this time if I could support the project further.
Thank you. Ms. Goury.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to maybe ease council's mind with the issue of having a closed mind. Council can vote any which way it wants on a first reading, a second reading, regardless of how they feel at this particular moment. It's when it actually is at a public hearing, regardless of the way they voted at first and second reading, that they are at the public hearing with an open mind. So I just want council to be okay in their minds right now this evening that by voting one way or another isn't showing their position. They just have to go into a public meeting with an open mind.
Thank you very much. Councillor Armstrong?
Thank you, Your Worship. I do have some concerns. One thing is when we say we want to go into with an open mind, what I'm hearing is closed mind, that it should be residential only. That's the message I'm getting. It could be wrong. I find it difficult to say to the owner of the land that we're only going to allow you to build residences. So if he chooses not to, then I'm assuming, please staff correct me if I'm wrong, that that land can remain vacant for as long as he wants. So that's a question I have for staff.
No, we did not advise the applicant that this site is for residential only. We advise that the OCP gives preference to mixed-use development as well as medium to high-density residential. It can be either or both, whatever is feasible on the site. We are absolutely open to all suggestions. And in fact, in our conversations early on with Mr. Holland, we did, as he mentioned, explored other opportunities to intensify the site. When he referenced additional office use on the site, we got excited and thought, great, we've got something we can work with. We said, would that be open to the rest of the community so other businesses could go in there? And the answer was no. This was closed to the dealership only.
And further to that, I think if we're going to look at other options, I think we certainly need to look at a proper traffic study, because I do not believe that road can handle the amount of traffic to bring in more commercial and residential areas. It's already an issue now, and I don't know how we can expand on it further. And the third point would be that there's also a possibility that whoever does build, if they do have to build condos, it could be very expensive because they're going to have water views. So I just think we need to be thinking about that in those terms too, because I don't think we can say it has to be affordable housing and we have an issue. We have buildings that are selling for apartments for $700,000, $800,000, so that it could also be a possibility there. So I just want to put it out, because I am getting my feelings, and obviously I'm for the dealership, is that we have to be aware of that too, right? We can't dictate that you have to put affordable housing in it, because if we do, we may have that piece of land sitting vacant for many, many years. So just something to think about. That's the message I was getting from this council, is that we want housing there. Thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Through the chair, believe Councillor Thorpe summed up my views on this particular development. This is a pretty complex question, this dealership, and I think it draws together many issues that we're facing in planning in the city. We have a burgeoning auto industry and an auto mall located directly in the center of our city. And we're also facing the challenges of building a community that's more sustainable, that we don't keep sprawling out and people have access to public transportation, that we have mixed-use residential, and creating a more livable city that people can move around in easily. And Nanaimo's history and how it's developed hasn't made that easy, and I commend the work that staff has done on the OCP over the successive years in trying to identify nodes and corridors and build this idea of a more integrated, complete city. And I think that we as a community need to update the OCP and come to a shared vision of where we're going to put our residential, our industrial lands, where we're going to locate future auto dealerships, so that there's a plan to move towards something that's going to work better for everybody. Because at the moment, I think that there's not a lot of cohesion and agreement on that. So I do understand the need to give this some further thought. So I will be somewhat reluctantly supporting for this to go to a public hearing.
I'm a child of the 60s, and you might remember the song. It says, you know, sometimes you can't get what you want, but you get what you need. I appreciate that staff and the Residents Association may well wish to see residential development on this property. And certainly this community is undergoing a residential boom right now, particularly in terms of the development of rental housing, rental accommodation, multiple unit buildings. Having said that, and having lived here as long as I have, with great respect, that would probably be one of the last places I would want to occupy for rental accommodation or alternatively residential accommodation on that site unless I was stuck well at the back and well buffered from the highway. I'm not overwhelmed by the arguments that there aren't car dealerships nearby. As Councillor Turley pointed out, the Volkswagen dealership is across the road and the Galaxy Motors operation is just down the road from that. I'm conscious of the fact that also there were a number of multi-residential buildings, multi-unit buildings contained in the presentation from city staff, all supposedly, not supposedly, but said to be near to the highway. And I'm familiar with those projects and have looked at them as well, and many of them are not as near to the road as this site. It is for that reason, and particularly looking at our economy and understanding that the best business strategy, which we all at this council table have been advised, is firstly to retain your existing businesses and build on them. I'm going to vote in support of this motion tonight, and it will go to public hearing. And as Councillor Hemmons wisely pointed out, if people are opposed to it, that will be their opportunity to come forward and do so. But I cannot look at the possibility of 70 jobs in this community, the expansion of an existing dealership, and looking at this site in particular, and having heard Councillor Bonner's comments about what would be needed for parking if it was a residential property, let alone what it would require if it was commercial property with a number of businesses on the site, I'm simply not moved by that. So I will be voting in support of it. I see no one else on the list unless someone else to add themselves to the list. So the motion is second reading. All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carried. Thank you.
So, Your Worship, there's one more motion for you to make on this matter, and that's to direct staff to secure the community contribution, road dedication, and rights of way prior to the adoption of the bylaw, should council support the bylaw at third reading.
So moved, Councillor Martman, seconded Councillor Hemmons. Discussion on that motion, Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm still, as Councillor Turley just pointed out to me a little while ago, some of the area would be actually used for parking. But I would really seriously like to see the community contribution be the square footage of the building and every lot, every parking spot that a car for sale will be on as part of that community contribution. I have no way of figuring that out, so.
Councillor Armstrong.
Would that change our policy for everybody? Because I think we need to apply our policy fairly across all businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Armstrong, I think that was going to be my point, is that right now, the policy, council's policy, it's based on a square meter building floor area. So it would be with that with this and any application that staff meet with, any applicant we meet with, we would be providing them that policy. I understand Councillor Bonner's position, and I think as part of the review of our community contributions policy, which is a direction from council and is underway, I think that's something that we should look at. But to do something midstream, I believe would be challenging.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carried.
Your Worship, there is a scheduled recess that was scheduled for 9 o'clock, and the next issue is going to probably, the next matters are going to take some time, so I would recommend council take their recess now.
Thanks.
10 minutes.
Make them justify a change.
will be a new decorum statement read out at the start of each meeting to ensure proper decorum is taking place and to assist the chair in his duties. So the proper rules of order and the decorum will be as follows. There will be only one speaker at a time that will have the floor as directed by the chair of the meeting. There will be no interruptions or call-out comments while another person has the floor. Anyone speaking out without having been acknowledged by the chair will be found out of order. If that person does not refrain from speaking without having been acknowledged by the chair, then he or she will be required to leave. For the members of the public speaking, the comments need to be respectful and constructive. Discriminatory or defamatory comments or comments that are in the nature of harassment will not be tolerated, and anyone engaging in such communications will be found out of order. Some examples of behavior that won't be tolerated at a council meeting are as follows. 1. Harassment. In terms of comments about city employees of the City of Nanaimo have a right not to be subjected to discriminatory or defamatory comments or personal attacks against their competency or character. All speakers must refrain from such comments about identifiable staff. Comments should be limited to issues regarding the city's policies or operations. Number 2. Section 7 of the Human Rights Code prohibits a discriminatory publication because of race, color, ancestry, place of origin, religion, marital status, family status, physical or mental disability, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or age. Discriminatory comments will not be tolerated. Number 3, defamation is publication about a person that tends to hurt that person's reputation. Defamatory comments will not be tolerated. Please stick to known facts and keep the dialogue respectful and constructive.
Are you tired of dragging the garbage out? They just don't make them like they used to. It's a saying that doesn't really apply to garbage cans. Yes, young man, you seem ready for a new garbage and recycling experience. Take a look at the new green, blue, and black carts right behind you. Yes, exactly. Oh, I see your confusion. I can fix it. Go ahead, give them a try. Pretty easy to roll, right? Did you know that a set of these carts will be delivered to every house in Nanaimo as a part of the new Sort, Toss, Roll program? It's designed to make it easy for you to sort your waste, toss it into the correct cart, and roll it to the curb.
3 carts will be assigned to your home, but the city actually owns them. This way, the city will maintain responsibility for repairing and replacing the carts when it's needed.
Wow, you really are happy about this. There are a few things you need to know before you start wheeling your carts to the curb. Are you ready? Great, let's get ready to sort, toss, roll.
Yeah!
Did you think that this was a silent video? Well, now that you've found your voice, why don't you narrate this next bit?
The new Sort, Toss, Roll automated curbside collection program is coming to Nanaimo in 2 phases. Phase 1 is being rolled out to central Nanaimo now. Sort, Toss, Roll will come to the rest of Nanaimo in the summer of 2018. Carts will be delivered and placed at the end of your driveway, yard, or curbside. This is how you should place your carts on collection days. An information package will be left for you, further introducing you to the new program. with information spanning from instructions on how to place your cart on different types of streets to options for cart upsizing, or details on what goes into each cart.
Wow, you really know your stuff. Tell me, why are there 3 colors of carts?
Well, this one is for organics, this one is for garbage, and this blue one over here is for any recyclables.
Very good. Now, what goes into the blue recycling cart?
Cardboard, plastic containers, milk jugs, cans, or anything that used to go into the yellow recycling bags.
Now, David, what goes into the green cart?
The green cart is for your organics. Any compostable food, pizza boxes, or napkins. Anything that used to go into the old organics bin.
And
what?
I'll give you a hint.
Yard clippings.
Yes, the new green cart has plenty of room for grass and weeds. Now, what about the black cart?
Easy. That one is for garbage. Any waste that can't be composted or recycled. But what if the carts aren't big enough?
Well, the city of Nanaimo has an exchange program in place. Homes that have more demand for recycling and household waste can upsize their carts. That reminds me, anyone that has questions about the Sort Toss Roll program can call the hotline or visit our webpage.
The standard 240-litre blue recycling cart can hold 3 times the amount of recyclables as your yellow bag, and it won't blow away in the wind. The 120-litre green cart can hold 3 times as much as your old green bin, and the 120-litre black bin is about the size of 1.5 garbage bags. And now, you won't even need to buy those black garbage bags.
Are you going to get that?
I probably should. Take over for a bit, will you?
Okay.
Excellent. Thanks.
Hang on. Let's try this. Sort Toss Roll is a new way of doing away with waste. New trucks are a big part of the program and come equipped with an automated arm to lift, dump, and replace the carts on collection day. The trucks are efficient. Each truck has 2 compartments and can pick up both your weekly organics and your recycling or garbage. They are also fueled by compressed natural gas, so they are green too. And the trucks are safe. Our waste collectors no longer need to lift the cans manually. This means far less injuries on the job and happier workers. The new trucks are awesome. The arms can reach out up to 10 feet to pick up the carts. It is important you place them properly on collection day though, to make sure that your waste and recycling can be picked up. How you place your carts depends largely on the type of street your home is on. If your street looks like this, with a sidewalk divided and set in from the curb, place your carts like this. If your street looks like this, with a sidewalk and a curb as one, place your carts like this. If your street doesn't have a sidewalk or curb, place your carts like this at the end of your driveway. And finally, if you have a curbed sidewalk but can't place your carts behind the sidewalk because of a wall, ditch, or fence, place your carts like this in front of the curb. Always remember to place your carts 1 meter apart to allow room for the automated arm, and point the arrow on your cart legs towards the street. In the occasional neighborhood, there are other factors that may affect how you can place your carts, such as street parking or steep hills. The City of Nanaimo will find a collection solution for every situation. It may not look like it, but there's technology in the carts. Each cart has a digital ID tag, which tells the truck which house it belongs to and whether it's the recycling, organics, or waste cart, so that it gets dumped to the right compartment at pickup.
Contamination happens when things that can't get recycled get tossed into the blue cart. Styrofoam, plastic bags and glass can't be accepted at the curb. The automated sorting machine at the recycling facility cannot process them. This means contaminated loads of recycling end up being sent to landfill. So do your part and recycle smart.
Sort Toss Roll. It's easy, efficient, green, clean, and safe.
I was going to say that.
Go ahead then.
It's easy, efficient, green, clean, and safe.
That about sums it up.
David, time for dinner.
Don't worry, we've covered a lot today, and if people want to learn more about Sort Toss Roll,
call the hotline, 250-756-5390.
Come on, David.
I've got to go.
What was that number again?
250-756-5390.
If we can reconvene, the next item is Development Variance Permit Application Number DVP 374, 60 Bryden Street. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Worship. As you mentioned, we have a development variance permit application for council's consideration for the subject property. And maybe I'll ask that, well, you're already ahead of me. The air photo is projected on the screen. I wanted to give you some context. This is a extraordinarily small historic property within the city of Nanaimo, as outlined in the report, 183 square meters, which is just under 2,000 square feet. So certainly much smaller than even the smallest lot that's allowed currently within the zoning bylaw. The lot was created in approximately 1912 and was subdivided off the parent property at that time. As you can see from the air photo, there is an existing dwelling on the property. The dwelling is on many sides very close to, built right to the edge of the property, so it's very minimal or no setbacks. In this case, the applicants are requesting a variance in order to demolish and remove the existing house and replace it with a new home. The variances that are being requested are to reduce the front yard setback from 4.5 meters to 1.8 meters, side yard setback on the west side from 1.5 meters to 0.91 meters, the rear yard setback from 7.5 to 6 meters, and increase the lot coverage from 40 to 44%. I would note down on attachment D is the, if we can bring up attachment D, it shows the site plan with the proposed house on it, with the proposed setbacks, Your Worship. Thank you.
So we do have a delegation, Your Worship, a
Yes.
couple of delegations.
Scott Mack, Vic Sweet, and Jill Sweet. And you've been here all evening, so you know the rules. Good evening.
Thank you, Worship, members of council. Disappointed that most of my audience is left. I do have a council presentation here I'd like to give. I'm here tonight to speak to item 10G on the agenda, which is of course the development variance permit proposed for number 374 at 60 Bryden Street. I'm here on behalf of the owners of the neighboring property to the west, Mr. and Mrs. Vic and Jill Sweet. My presentation tonight is in order to speak to some of the concerns that the owners of the property next door have with the proposed application. As you're aware, a 2,468 square foot home has been proposed to be constructed on the subject property, which, as Mr. Lindsay has pointed out, is arguably one of the smallest lots within the city. The owners of 60 Bryden presumably were aware of the limitations that this lot posed when they purchased the property. However, given the unique situation, we acknowledge that unique solutions are required and that perhaps some variances are necessary in order to facilitate construction of a home on this lot. We will note, however, that while they may be desirable, they are not necessarily critical to allow for development of this property. We've calculated that approximately 1,600 square feet, which is still a very reasonable home, could be constructed on the lot without any variances required. Having said that, the owners of 210 Stewart Avenue do not wish to be unreasonable and are attempting to seek compromise here, and they are prepared to accept that some variances may be acceptable. They do, however, have concerns specifically with the proposed 60% variance to the minimum front yard setback, as well as the 40% variance to the side yard requirement directly adjoining their property, which they believe will unduly impact the enjoyment of their own personal property. The proposed siting and design for 60 Bryden has very clearly been established in order to maximize views and windows openings to the south and east side of the house in order to maximize views to Newcastle Channel and Nanaimo Harbor. While this is certainly understandable and we would expect that anybody would try to maximize those views, we don't believe that it is appropriate to maximize those views through the granting of variances that would come at the expense of taking away or diminishing the view that exists from my client's property to the west. As you can see here, what I've done is identify in the white hatched box the setbacks as per the zoning bylaw, and as you can see in the orange, these are the areas in which the building would extend out into the front west side and rear yard. And as you can see, it obviously extends out quite close to the front lot line in particular. Excuse me. In relation to the side yard setback issue, what you see here on the top is the east elevation, which is obviously the side of the house which would face the water, where they have provided for a significant number of windows, and again, in order to maximize that view. One of the concerning things is that they haven't actually even built right to that side yard lot line, which presumably allows them to expand the number of windows on that side of the building, while at the same time moving in excess of 2 feet closer to the lot line on the west side, which is where my clients own their property. And as a result of that movement to within 3 feet of the side lot line, that would preclude, as a result of building code requirements, any windows from being located within that side of the building. And so essentially, my clients are left looking at a blank wall that's 40 feet long and almost 30 feet high. Fortunately, Council has a neighborhood plan which speaks to many of these issues, both in terms of the views as well as infill residential development. There are 52 references in the neighborhood, in the Newcastle and Brecon neighborhood plan with regard to the value and the importance of views and maintaining views. There are also specific policies which speak to infill development and how buildings should be sited in relation to existing homes within the neighborhood. And as you can see there, it speaks specifically to the issues around matching setbacks in order to ensure that new buildings fit into the neighborhood. So there again, you can see the proposed building footprint. I'm trying to finish up here as I've got 30 seconds. Which quite clearly doesn't align with the existing setbacks or the footprints, both for the existing house at 210 Stewart Avenue, as well as, you may be aware, 215 Newcastle Avenue is currently a vacant lot. But what I've done there is shown the building envelope for a likely potential future build on that lot at some point in the future. And so what we would request is not necessarily that the building be shrunk, rather that it be moved further back on the lot, where we believe it won't have any impact on any of the other surrounding properties. It will certainly reduce the impact on my client's property, and as I said, doesn't necessarily need to result in any loss of square footage. And so what you see there is a building that's been moved back to the 4.5 meter front yard lot line or setback line, as well as a shift rather than the side yard setback being on the west, it's now on the east side. And so in closing, just a request, essentially an acknowledgement that we recognize and accept that a house will be built, and that certainly it's going to have an impact on views because it's between my client's property and the water. We certainly accept that reality. However, we would request that council reconsider the variances that have been requested with the application, and that you consider an alternative scenario as laid out on this slide here, which would allow
your time
for
is
a similar
certainly
building. Thank
truly
you.
up. Thank you.
If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and address them.
Councillor Armstrong?
Thank you. Through you to the delegation. So when we have our recommendations, which is the setback that you would like reduced? Is it the front, the side, or the rear?
So essentially what we're asking for is that the front yard and west side yard setbacks be respected as per the zoning, so 4.5 meters and 1.5 meters. And that as a result, if there's a desire to keep the building the same size, that it be shifted back on the lot. And so that would increase the rear yard variance requirement, which I believe currently is 6 meters. That would increase it to 3.3 meters.
And how much would that change the view? Like, how much of the view is lost with the plan that we're being asked to approve versus yours?
My clients have windows both on the east as well as the south side of their building. And so the rough calculations that we did suggested that they were losing, it depends on which window you're looking from. There was one window where the view was entirely lost, and the remaining window is lost anywhere between roughly 1/3 to 2/3 of the view that they would currently have.
Thank you.
Councillor Hemmons?
Thank you. Through you to the delegation. The current vacant lot that you've drawn a building on, would that not compromise the views in the way that this variance on Bryden would?
Through your worship to Councillor Hemmons, if I understand the question correctly, you're wondering if when 215 Newcastle is built upon if that's going to compromise the views for my client's property. No, we don't believe it would, given my client's property is a single-story building, so we're not talking about views over top of or beyond the peak of roof of buildings. What we're looking at is views essentially down the Bryden Street corridor, which are really would only be affected as a result of construction on the lot next door.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? No. Councillor Bonner.
Just a quick one, Your Worship, through you to our delegation. Has the Suites approached the owner of this property and asked them about moving it back?
I don't have the answer to that question, unfortunately, but Mr. Sweet is planning to come up and make some comments following my presentation, so I'm sure he'd be happy to answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further? No? Thank you. The next delegation on the list, Peter and Sandy King, please.
Good
evening.
Councillors, thanks for the opportunity to be able to speak to this application. I just wanted to, among other things, put some faces to the names that are undertaking this proposal. I'm afraid I don't have quite the high-tech presentation that we had before me, and I'm hoping that you possibly did get a handout that I provided. Sandy and I worked quite hard after we bought this property. We are looking to downsize. We were looking to find a home that was closer to town, that had walkability and a more pedestrian life for us as we approached our retirement. We did engage an architect who had some expertise with infill homes, largely in Vancouver, and hoped that she'd be able to provide us with the appropriate style and design and placement of this house. We certainly looked very hard at the impact of the placement of the house with regards to all of our neighbors, including both of the Stewart Avenue homes. And I think that some of the previous demonstration may have been a little bit misleading. And again, I'm hoping you have the handout that I provided to City Council this morning. But among other things, I think the setbacks that or the variance we were looking for isn't quite as extensive as it looks in the preceding drawings. It shows on the one that I provided you, the blue is the actual setbacks, the red represents the placement of the house, and the black surrounding that is where the current house is. The difference is going from 60% to approximately 44% of the total land. As well, I went to the trouble of putting the trees in this picture because I think it addresses the issues surrounding view. It should be noted that both Stewart Avenue homes obviously have their major feature looking onto Stewart Avenue, so we're talking about the backyard. The one Stewart Avenue basically is a driveway with an addition further back on the house. And if you look at the difference between the variance versus the proposed house, the loss of view because of the presence of the trees becomes fairly nominal to the Stewart Avenue house. As we set our house further back, we then impact the subsequent Stewart Avenue house to the north of that. So we felt that this was the best compromise. We certainly were trying to take into account all of our neighbors, and we were hopeful that City Council would see fit to approve this. Certainly, I don't think it was explained in detail, and so I don't have the city planner's recommendations, but they do talk about the placement, the size of the backyard. The other issue which I need to address is parking, because the Newcastle Neighborhood Association did express concern, and obviously going from 2 parking to 0 is a big ask, but their concern seemed to be that this was setting a precedent, and I felt that the unique nature of this property would make any of the parking variance request specific to this property, not something that would extend to the neighborhood in general. Clearly, if we were to become members of the neighborhood, we would be equally concerned about the parking issues here. Sandy has one thing to say.
Can I just make a little comment too? I just wanted to be clear. I wanted to make sure it wasn't confusing. The Stewart Avenue house has a view onto Stewart Avenue. It has a back portion to its house that I believe is used for some other purpose, but there's a driveway right into that portion of the garage. So I'm not sure that view, their view is out onto Stewart, and us blocking their view might be something that could be a bit misconstruing, so.
I guess one small other item, I haven't seen the yellow light come on yet. It's worth noting as well that there is an easement between our property and Stewart Avenue. And the easement is 10 feet, and it's an easement in our favor to allow access to the backyard. That's why we felt that the westerly side ask of several feet was not going to be a significant issue based on the presence of that easement. So that's all I have to say. I appreciate your time. I realize it's late and the audience left, so we're on our own. We look forward to your consideration. I would hope that you have looked at your planning department's recommendation, which was to approve this. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. We may have some questions. Councillor Turley?
Yes, Your Worship, through you to the delegation. I'm just looking, I'm assuming this is the sheet now. Okay, so it says on here wood fence. Is that actually there?
The
Next to
Yes,
the
it
easement,
is.
west of the easement. So,
Yes, it is.
okay, thank you.
And if I can just, sorry, Councillor Gesselbrock, I'll go last.
Through the chair, what are your comments on the possibility of just moving the proposed construction that you have back from like what was shown in the last presentation, just back and over?
Well, there are a couple of issues, I guess. One is that I would be quite disappointed if we moved the house back to improve a view that didn't exist. The other is that as we move it back, you know, and this is about us, I'm afraid, but we look to see if we could have a small yard with a bit of area to garden. And as we move the house back, obviously it encroaches on any opportunity to do that. As well, when we first looked at this, we were aware of the other Stewart Avenue house, which has a back porch that looks that way. And I appreciate that the Newcastle home is now an empty lot, but I know that there is, because I know the owner, some opportunity for them to be building there. But despite that, as we push further back, we then will encroach on any view that they might have as well. We, I don't think, took into account a significant view from the 210 Stewart Avenue house, largely because basically there is that building, which is the 1987 addition, as well as the fact that in front of that is basically a driveway and a rear entrance. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Any others? I just want to confirm, you say the existing footprint of the existing dwelling covers 60% of the lot?
66.
Yeah, it's an old house, and it's slated to come
didn't
down,
assume it was
obviously.
new.
And I think it was added on to over time, so that it actually encroaches on all three sides of the property at the moment.
But it's, you say 60 or 66% of the property?
Well, it's 60 plus.
60 plus?
Yes.
And your proposed dwelling is 44%, is that correct?
Right.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Givondo, you're trying to take control of my meeting. I'm just about to ask if there are any other persons who wish to speak with respect to development variance permit.
My name is Peter Givondo, Your Worship, councillors. I want to speak in favor of this particular variance application. My wife and I own two properties which are adjacent to Lot 60. And if we could have the lot plan, that might be of assistance to you because I can show you which lots those are. The first one is 225 Newcastle Avenue, and you can see that the southwest corner of 225 Newcastle abuts on the north east corner of Lot 60. That's a residence in which my wife and I live in. The other is a house immediately behind our house on 225 Newcastle, which is located at 220 Stewart Avenue, and that's a rental house. We've had an opportunity to review the plans proposed by Dr. and Mrs. King. We are strongly in favor of them. The existing house at Lot 60 is probably close to 100 years old. It's outlived its usefulness, and as your worship pointed out, the existing footprint of that house is significantly greater than the footprint of the house which Dr. and Mrs. King are proposing to replace it with. So we think that this would be a great addition to the neighborhood, and we're strongly in favor of the application. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fondo. Others, any questions? Thank you very much. Again, are there any other persons wishing to speak with respect to development fair? Mr. Sweet. You just introduce yourself for the record. Thank you.
Victor Sweet. I own 210 Stewart, directly west of the subject property, 60. Bryden, thank you for listening to my concerns. I gave council a handout, and I'd like you to refer to the very first picture. It says about the parking. That's a picture yesterday of the parking situation. The parking on the street is completely full, so we need off-site parking. I believe he has a challenging site, and he has to have 2 spots. I'm quite willing, and I would like to see down to 1, which would suffice. Next page is basically not changing his house at all, but just shifting it back. We do actually have a view down, we have a patio area to the right of our home near Bryden, and we look right at the existing home that's there and past it, underneath the trees, to the ocean. We're trying to preserve that ocean view as much as we can. And so that's why we've asked for at least to be set down to back to the proper setback, as our zoning expert explained. Third page. It basically shows you where my view is going to be impacted. And if it's set back to the proper line, that will, I realize I am going to have some impact, but if he does put it back to the proper line, I can accept that. Next page. The house that he proposes is, yes, smaller footprint, but it's going to be 30 some odd feet high. And with his house only being 3 feet off my property line and the eaves only 1 foot off my property line, you know, we just had this snow. It's going to become a very hazardous area on my property due to his construction of a sloped roof, and then say I park in a boat or whatever, it would be then compromised completely. I wouldn't be able to use that section of my property because it'd be very hazardous and a liability. Next page is basically what I did was I looked at houses in the neighborhood, and I know it's not in a development permit area, so he can build what he wants, but it should kind of, since he's asking for variances, kind of conform to the neighborhood. And a West Coast design doesn't really fit into 100-year-old character homes. It's just right out of place. I'm a real estate appraiser, and I see that all the time where it actually affects neighboring properties if he values them. These are the closest 14 homes around the property that are single family. And as you can see, they're all character 100-year-old style homes that have been renovated over the years. There has been some new project in the area, and they were built in a character way. The view factor is actually underneath the trees. We look down to the ocean. So building up high and putting a deck up top, that's not really the answer. Trees grow up. It really should be an open porch at the front, look towards the ocean, and that would be a lot more suiting to the neighborhood. Next page is really the location of where all these homes were. You can see it's all right around the property. Last page, his current zoning is R8, and it's stated that it's 1,980 square feet. Well, the maximum under that zoning actually is, you can only build 2,475. So he's actually exceeding the current zoning, what he wants to build on this property. So I think it's a very ambitious plan for a very, very small lot. As my planner said, more like a 1,600 square foot lot would be the norm, characterized with the neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Sweet? Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Mr. Sweet. I have three questions. I don't know if you can answer one of them, but first one is regarding parking. Is there anybody currently living in that 60 Bryden that has a vehicle?
There is a renter, I believe. I don't live at
okay,
Stewart.
that's fine.
I rent it out too.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And secondly, how tall is the fence on your backyard line? How tall is the fence between your property and the next one?
That is a fence about 4 feet high.
Okay.
And I'm actually waiting till his house gets demolished, and then I'm going to actually fence my entire property appropriately.
Okay. And, sorry, I had to write things down because I don't remember. This I doubt that you'll know either, but I guess the concern about snow is quite dependent on the type of roofing membrane that's on the roof as to whether it slides or not.
Yeah, metal roof, no,
you don't want
no
that.
friction, it'll slide a
Yeah,
long way.
yeah.
Another type of roof. Good formula is 3 to 1,
Yeah.
25 feet up. Well, if it's 30 feet up, it'll slide at least 10 to 12 feet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Sweet.
Okay, thank you.
Motion? Sorry? Yes? And if you, usual, if you can introduce yourself, I'd appreciate it.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Sweet. I do have an interest in 210 Stewart, and I just wanted to say that I'm all for new construction and stuff like that, but it has to be within the proper setbacks. I'm a very black and white person, so like what I'm going to say is basically when you're at the property at Stewart 210, their back area faces, they have a kitchen. You can wash the dishes. You can look out. You can see the ocean down the road of Bryden Corridor Street. So if they build with the setbacks that they're requiring, all you're going to see is a 30-foot wall, no windows, nothing. And you look out in the kitchen, all you're going to see is a wall. So it's affecting. I myself, I'm a real estate appraiser in Nanaimo, and this is going to affect the property value at 210 Stewart. You're looking at a $20,000 decrease in the value, and they're going to increase their property. They're well aware when they purchased the property that the purchase price of this property was far significant less because of the setbacks, the limitations of this property. So I'm opposed to the frontage and the parking. I have concerns about the parking. There's numerous events on the seawall and stuff like that. Families coming down myself. Parking's already limited there. So I believe that there should be a driveway in place for parking, because if you start doing that, it's going to start setting a standard for other properties that are going to be demolished in the area and stuff like that. So, what I have to say is basically I'm opposed to the variances that they're requesting, and it just be pushed back to a standard, to the proper setbacks and stuff like that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sweet. Any questions? If I may, your parents indicated they were the owners of 210 Stewart, and you've just said you had an interest in the property?
Yes, as well.
You're a registered owner. You're not the occupant, though, I take it?
I'm not the occupant, no.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Question for staff, if it's now appropriate? Or do you want the motion first?
I think I'd like the motion, and then we'll move to questions, if that's all right. That's Councillor Brown, seconded Councillor Emmons. Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Some questions for staff, please. The snow issue is one that is concerning. If we approve this with the type of roofing, whatever, is there liability to the city if something is to happen? Because we've changed the variances?
Your worship, I don't believe that the city is adding any additional liability. It's not uncommon to have buildings that are built on property lines, depending on the nature of the use, and the responsibility for stormwater management is ultimately a civil responsibility.
And second question, the parking issue, that is always a concern for me, because if we say that it's okay for people in that area to park on streets, then now we set a precedence that it's okay in other areas. So I am very concerned about parking. I think we have limited parking in that area, so I do struggle with that. And then my other question oh, hang on, I got notes. Actually, pass to somebody else and I can ask after. Thank you, Your Worship.
Questions from anyone else? Councillor Armstrong, we'll give you a minute to sort through.
Yeah. Based on what you heard from the other planner, is that an option that could be used for that site that would not have the same impact on views and still account for the needs of the King family? If you can't answer.
Certainly, there are other options, I guess, that are available and would have to be considered if council denied this application. I think it's difficult to start picking certain elements of this proposal, and I think you need to look at it as entirety.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, thank you, Your Worship, and I don't know who to address it to, but my concern is the existing house has a tenant in it, I heard, but we don't know whether there's a vehicle attached to that house. If there is, obviously it's parked on the street, because according to the footprint on the diagram, there's no place on the property for it. So I'm having a bit of comfort issues with that particular item, and I don't know if somebody has an answer to that, or, yes, I believe Mrs. King does.
We'll let Mr. Lindsay.
Oh, okay.
Your Worship, maybe I could provide my comments about the parking, because I think it's been well explained this evening that all of the parking for this property would need to be, whether the current tenant requires a car or not, but any future tenant or existing tenant would be parking in Bryden, so everything relies on parking within the public right-of-way. One of the things that staff looked at, and this is a very unusual lot, a very small lot, and the frontage on the property is only about 9 meters. So if you think about that in terms of on-street parking, that's only about 1.5 cars of parking. So if we went through and added a driveway from the roadway into the property for parking, you'd actually be losing on-street parking. So we didn't see it. You'd be losing one public parking space in favor of one private public space, if you follow that argument. So for that reason, staff have supported the variance down to 0.
Thank you.
Any further questions? All right. Councillor Bonner.
Not so much a question as more just discussion. We're in that point, right?
Yes.
I think I have a problem with the variance. I mean, I'm seeing what I'm seeing here is in terms of the design of the building. All the views are going to be in the front, and it looks like the building is being moved forward so that no matter what gets built on the property next to it, they'll still have their views, which is good for them, but I'm thinking there's got to be some sort of compromise here. And I'm quite of the opinion that I think it should be back to the regular lot line. If they still want to garden in the backyard, they just need to redesign the back end of the house a bit. I just don't think I think it's, to be fair to everybody in the neighborhood, it should probably be back at the lot line. So that's my.
Any further discussion on this? Councillor Gesselbrock?
Through the chair, I I'm of a similar opinion as Councillor Bonner. I appreciate the needs of all the parties involved, but yeah, just with the issue of fairness in terms of moving it forward farther. I don't know exactly the views. It doesn't sound like the current owners live at that property. However, I can understand the concern. There's better southern exposure for a garden in the front yard with the building moved back, but for me it's a question of fairness, and so I won't be supporting the variance as such. Thanks.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I will be supporting the variance. Visited this site this weekend. I do acknowledge there will be some impact to the neighboring property. However, I think it's quite a thoughtful design for a very challenging parcel, so I will be supporting it.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I will be supporting it as well. I think this is a really unique, tiny lot, and I really appreciate that this is not for everyone, and the owners are willing to kind of be creative with the space that they have. This is not something that everyone would be interested in building. I'm also looking at a Google image of it, and there are two large coniferous trees, and I understand from previous delegations that the view is underneath them. This photograph is from June 2015, but it looks to be about 8 feet up that the boughs start. So unless those have been really kind of cut up, I don't know that I'm really convinced that that leaves a really good view. So I'm inclined to support staff on this one.
Any further discussion?
Just a clarifying point, I'm not opposed to building a house here. I think it's a great idea. Having owned probably the smallest lot in town, I can appreciate the work that's gone into making this thing work. I just think it should be back at the lot line so everybody gets a bit of the view. Thanks.
Thank you. No further discussion? All those in favor of the variance? Opposed? Motion carries.
And just for the record, could we just say who was opposed out loud, Your Worship?
Councillors Bonner, Armstrong, and Gesselbrock. The next item is Development Variance Permit Application Number DVP 377-3583 Hammond Bay Road. Mr. Lindsay, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you mentioned, a development variance permit application for the subject property in order to increase retaining wall height from 1.2 meters to 3.5 meters in the front yard. As you can see on the air photo, that the retaining wall has been constructed and is now in place, and in fact was the subject of a council-approved variance in July of 2017. At that time, council granted a variance of 1.2 meters to 3.2 meters in order to allow for this stepped retaining wall to be constructed. As a result of through the construction, they encountered some difficulties on the property, specifically with rock, and the end wall ended up, when it was surveyed, ended up to be slightly over the previous variance request. So the applicants are requesting a new variance in order to legalize the retaining wall as completed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindsay. Is there anyone here wishing to speak with respect to Development Variance Permit Application Number DVP 377-3583 Hammond Bay Road? Doesn't appear to be. Would someone care to make the recommended motion? Councillor Brown, seconded Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? Councillor, oh, they've shut me off.
Work anymore.
1, 2, 3, 4. There is it.
You're on? Yeah, I'm on now.
I'm glad you are.
I'll go ahead and speak, shall I?
Ms. Gurry?
It's actually, well, the buttons aren't working, but the microphones might be. Mine is. Sorry, Your Worship, it's technical difficulties. If Councillor Turley could just speak really
I'm sure
loud.
Councillor Turley's capable of
Thank you.
speaking. I've
Your
heard him
Worship.
before.
Once I beat Councillor Bonner.
Sounds like his neck is
Do carry on. We're all
I will.
listening.
Okay, so through you to Mr. Lindsay, the picture on page 259, the one at the top that shows the block wall along, I'm assuming that's Hammond Bay Road, is that what's existing now? And if you could kind of explain to me what they're actually trying to do?
Can I ask the image that Councillor Turley's referring to? Can you bring that up? Because I don't have the page number. I just wanna make
Okay,
sure.
attachment D for David?
Attachment D, okay.
Yeah, the top one, there we
So
are.
these are images that I asked for the applicants to provide, which is the wall that has now been completed. So the variance, if the variance is approved by council, will legalize the wall as you see it
Okay,
here,
thank
as
you.
constructed.
Any further discussion on this? Councillor Thorpe is amazing. He's brought it back to light. Thank you.
There you
Well,
go.
maybe technical help too, who knows? Any further, Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Your Worship.
To pass this without letting you have a couple of words.
Thank you, appreciate it very much so. And I actually have a question on process here in terms of inspection. The permit was for a certain height, and when the builder got to that height and realized they needed more, did they come back to the city and say, we need to relook at this permit? Or did they just build the whole thing and then came back to the city?
Your Worship, I don't know the exact timeline, but typically once a project's completed, we would ask for a survey. So whether it's a retaining wall or a house, it's probably not until they were actually completed did they know exactly if they were over the degree of which they were over.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Anyone else? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Next are bylaws. Smoking regulation bylaw number 2018, number 7268. Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Your Worship. A motion that smoking regulation bylaw 2018 number 7268 to regulate smoking in the city of Nanaimo be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carries. The next is a bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw 2019, number 7159.03.
Worship, motion that bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw 2019, number 7159.03, to include a schedule of penalties related to smoking regulation bylaw 2018, number 7268, be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carries. Thank you. The next is highway closure and dedication removal bylaw 2019, number 7274. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Motion that highway closure and dedication snow removal bylaw 2019, number 7274, to provide for a highway closure and dedicated removal of a portion of Labio Road adjacent to 2560 Bowen Road be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carries. Thank you. No correspondence, Ms. Gurry? No notices of motion? Any other business? Question period. Do we have any questioners? Thank you very much. Ms. Houghton, item 11A.
Just wanted some clarification to check to see if this smoking bylaw encompasses cannabis.
Mr. Lindsay.
That is affirmative, Your Worship. That was part of the driver behind updating our smoking bylaw, was to ensure it reflected the new federal regulations around cannabis.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Well, unless you're all anxious to stay here even longer, I'm going to ask for a motion for adjournment. Councillor Hemmond, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you, everyone, for putting in a long evening on behalf of the good citizens of Nanaimo. We are adjourned.